Welcome to Haunting Whispers. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment, where are you watching from and the time you are watching this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. A faceless creature destroyed my life. Life can take us in strange directions. No matter how intricately our best laid plans are, life has a way of disregarding them, as if they were nothing more than a fly buzzing around its head. For example, I wanted to be an electrical engineer. I'd had a few colleges in mind and was looking forward to graduating high school. Now, I'm in Ketchikan, Alaska, getting ready to head north. I'm going to be leaving a lot of my technology here, as it'll be useless once I get where I'm going. Which, come to think of it, is nowhere, really. I don't have a plan. But, regardless, I wanted to take a moment to recount the events of the last couple years that led me here. For starters, my name's Jake, and I've been living on the road for quite a while now. I'm from a small town in the Midwest called Riverstone, where I was born and raised. Some people from small towns tend to dislike them, or at least can't wait to leave. Not me, though. I loved Riverstone, and it breaks my heart to know I'll never be able to go back. All because of the events which took place my senior year. It was a cool Friday night at the end of homecoming week. My classmates and I sat on our school's bleachers, cheering on our football team with enough energy to power the whole town. We were seniors, so this was going to be our last homecoming game. We wanted to enjoy it while it lasted. At the end of the first quarter, there was a short timeout to let people get snacks and use the restroom or whatever while the teams got ready to play again. My friends and I were sitting at the back of the bleachers, so we had a pretty clear view of the field and surrounding area. Two of them had gone to get snacks, while the other, a guy named Matt, was messaging his girlfriend on his phone. I, meanwhile, just stared out at the crowd and field, not really thinking about anything. As I scanned the crowd, my eyes fell upon a girl across from me in the away team's bleachers. It was hard to make out any details of her face, but from what I could see, she was gorgeous. Long brown hair, glasses, and a smile so bright it rivaled the overhead lights. I continued to steal glances at her occasionally. Her looks aside, I was really just trying to see if she was there with a boyfriend or if he was playing for their team. She wasn't wearing a jersey, which gave me hope, but that fact was made immediately irrelevant just before halftime. After a particularly good play by her team, I looked up to gauge her reaction, only to be met by bare flesh where her face used to be, and she was looking in my direction. At least, the chill down my spine told me she was looking at me. It was hard to tell without any facial features. On top of that, she was dead still, like a scarecrow in a field of swaying corn. The people around her jostled and swayed, but she didn't move an inch. Not a single person took notice of her either. People bumped into her a few times, but they didn't react, as if the way she acted was perfectly normal. Thoroughly freaked out, I nudged Matt and got his attention. Thankfully, I'd pointed her out to him earlier in the game, so he knew where to look. In the moments I looked away and back again, though, she had returned to normal. Matt gave me a quizzical look for pointing the girl out to him again, but I was too dumbfounded to care. I thought maybe it was the distance, that my eyes had simply lost focus for a second, and turning my head got them to refocus. An explanation which, at the time, made total sense, so I brushed it off and continued watching the game. Now, I need to give a bit of context for this next part. From where my friends and I were sitting, we could see the opposing team's sideline clearly. This was perfect, since their coach was an absolute hothead. I mean, like, forehead vein bulging, red in the face kind of guy. Every time his team would mess up, he'd be shouting like his life depended on it. And it was hilarious. So when his players made a mistake, I would scan their sideline to see his reaction. After one such play, I did like I always had, but found the bare flesh looking up at me once again. Just like with the girl, the coach stood completely still despite all the people moving around him, and no one seemed to notice his odd behavior or lack of a goddamn face. Afraid that looking away might cause it to disappear again, I tried to get Matt's attention without breaking line of sight. Unfortunately, the universe had other plans as a man shuffled past me just as I was tapping Matt's arm. By the time the man passed, the coach was back to his shouting, red-faced self. Matt looked over at me. The look on my face must have caused him to speak up. "Hey man, you all right?" he asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. I continued to stare at the coach, but was pulled out of my dismay by Matt's hand. "Yeah," I said, not facing him. "Just thought I saw someone we knew." "You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." I turned to look at him. "Yeah, man, I'm goo." My words were cut off as a lump lodged itself in my throat. Behind Matt were my two other friends, but next to them were people we didn't know. The closest of those people, the one right next to my friend, was leaning forward in his seat. His arms hung straight down, limply swaying with the crowd. His head was turned at an angle just too sharp to be natural, and his face was gone. I lost it. I stood up and barreled through the audience with instinct and adrenaline guiding my every move. Before I knew it, I was out of the crowd and racing towards the parking lot. My phone began to ring, but I didn't answer it. All I could do at that moment was run, so I did. My feet hit the pavement, and my lungs heaved air as I ran to my car, jumped into it, and peeled out of that parking lot faster than ever. Honestly, looking back, I'm surprised I didn't get stopped by someone or pulled over. Guess I should count myself lucky, because in that state, I would have probably been arrested. But that didn't happen, and I made it home in one piece. I told my mom I wasn't feeling good and locked myself in my room for the rest of the night. I tried to rest, but my mind wouldn't stop thinking about the faceless people. No matter what I did to distract myself, the thoughts just kept coming. I did manage to fall into a restless sleep eventually, though. But when I woke up the next morning, it was into an entirely new world. Over the course of the next school year, I continually saw the faceless entity. There was no consistency to it, at least not that I could notice, but it only popped up in crowds and only affected humans. Activity slowed dramatically as the weather grew colder, but picked right back up again in the spring. That was when I got the idea to try and get proof that what I was seeing wasn't just in my head. It started as a spur-of-the-moment thing. I was out with some friends, including Matt, when I noticed it standing across the street. It had possessed a businessman and was staring at me. Notably, it still held a cell phone to its ear, with one hand and a briefcase in the other. My skin began to crawl with the chill of its gaze, but my phone vibrated in my hand, causing the light bulb to shine. Without a second thought, I held my phone in my peripheral vision, careful not to pull my focus away from the creature, and opened the camera app. I held the device as steady as I could and snapped multiple pictures. When I was done, I felt comfortable enough to look away so I could examine the photos, only to find they were useless. The pictures were so blurry, it was impossible to make out any significant details. The shape of the man was obvious, as was his surroundings, but everything else was incomprehensible. I considered at first that maybe I'd been shaking while I took the photos, but when later attempts looked the same, I knew it wasn't me. Disappointed, I deleted the photos like an idiot and sighed. I looked back to where the creature had been and found the businessman walking by as if nothing had broken his stride while he talked on the phone. I looked over to my friends and found Matt giving me a quizzical look. "Thought I saw a cool bird," I said. "Since when do you bird watch?" he asked, grinning. "I don't. It was just a cool-looking bird." "Well, let me see." The pictures didn't turn out. The camera was out of focus. Matt gave me another look, this one a mixture of knowing curiosity. The subject was quickly dropped, though, and we got back to just hanging out. Ever since, I've tried multiple times to get pictures of the thing with multiple different cameras, both digital and analog, only to get the same result. A blurry image with no discernible details, which I guess could be evidence in and of itself, or it's just proof that I'm a shitty photographer. From there, things continued to escalate as summer rolled in, and it got to the point where I was seeing the damn thing every single day. Even on my days off, when I never left the house, I'd see it standing in the street outside my house, just staring at me through the windows. I tried researching it, believe me, but every time I looked up something about faceless people, I'd either get Slender Man or some obscure creepypastas. I considered talking to my friends, but I thought they'd think I was crazy. Hell, at the time, I thought I was losing it. So, I did the one thing I could and confided in my parents. One thing you should know about my parents is that they loved me and my little sister with all their hearts, but they were not what you'd call cool parents. They could be very strict at times and were very demanding more often than not. They expected a lot from me and my sister, but it's only because they wanted us to succeed in life and never sell ourselves short. That being said, I heard them mention throughout my childhood how they didn't believe in mental illness. They thought that depression, anxiety, hell, even schizophrenia is something that could be just thought away. That should make it clear enough that such things don't run in my family at all, at least as far as I know. So I was scared going into the dinner. I'd had everything I wanted to say laid out in my head, and I even had a few of the better pictures I'd taken to help plead my case. My sister was staying at a friend's house, so she wouldn't be there for any fallout. It was foolproof in my mind. "Mom, Dad, there's something I need to talk to you about," I said, once we finished eating. We were sitting at the table. My dad was at the head to my right, and my mom was sitting across from me. "What's up, sweetie?" my mom asked, wiping her mouth with a napkin. Dad didn't say anything. He just tilted his head to face me. "Well, I'm not sure how to explain it," I began, "so I'm gonna just cut right to the chase." I pulled out the photos from my back pocket and handed them to my mom. She took them, and her expression grew confused. "I've been seeing faceless people," I said, feeling ridiculous. As soon as I spoke, my mom's eyes grew wide, and the color drained from her face. She threw the pictures on the floor and stood up from the table in unison with my dad. "You what?" my dad shouted, making his way around the table towards me. I stood and held my hands up defensively. "What? Dad, what's the big?" I tried to say, but was interrupted when he grabbed my shirt collar with both hands. "How long has this been happening?" he yelled. My mother retreated into the kitchen, her sobs practically shaking the walls. "I don't know," I stammered. Since September, I guess?" "September? Why didn't you tell us sooner?" He continued to yell. I don't know. I didn't think you'd believe me. I could hardly believe it myself." I raised my voice with that last sentence, trying to gain a semblance of control. "Does your sister know?" he said, pushing me away from the table towards the living room. "No, I haven't told anyone but you," I said while trying to keep my balance. "Good. Then get the hell out of this house and don't ever come back," he shouted, moving his steel grip to my shoulders and pushing me with even more force. "Mom," I yelled, trying to fight back against my dad's force. "Why?" she wailed from the kitchen. "Why did it have to be my baby?" I struggled with my dad for a while, begging him not to do this, but his face was resolute, despite the tears welling in the corners of his eyes. In the end, though, he won out with a knee to my stomach that winded me enough to let him shove me to the floor. He dragged me by my arms across the living room and towards the front door. He opened it, picked me up to my feet, and gave one last shove, sending me sprawling out onto the front step. Just before he closed the door, I could see the sadness overtaking his anger, and heard my mother's continuous wails. For the next couple hours, I banged on the door repeatedly, begging to be let back in. I got no response. Eventually, the realization they weren't going to let me back inside took hold, so I switched to begging for my car keys so I could at least sleep in there if I had to. I heard some shuffling inside, and after a few moments, my keys and wallet came flying out of my bedroom window. I picked them up from the front lawn and walked to my car. I sat there for a long time, just swimming in my thoughts and emotions, until the streetlights came on. The sudden, off-white glow pulled my attention for just long enough to get my head on straight. For the moment, my emotional turmoil was buried beneath ideas of what to do or where to go next. My first thought was to call my extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even my grandparents lived within driving distance. I figured I could stay with one of them and let this situation blow over, but all of my calls were rejected. Assuming my parents had contacted them, I started calling my friends. Most of them answered, but when I explained the situation, they instantly hung up. So as much as it killed me, I decided to call Matt, but not tell him the specifics of what happened. I wanted to see him in person before I told him any of that. "Yo," he said after a few rings. "Hey man," I said, "you busy?" "Nah, I'm just chillin'. What's up?" My parents are throwing a fit right now, and I just need to talk to somebody about it. Sure, man. You want me to come by your place? Actually, let's meet at Bury Park. Bet. Let me get into some nicer clothes and I'll be there in 10. All right, man. See you soon. With that, I drove to the park in silence. With how hectic my head was at that moment, the radio would have just been noise anyway. I got there well before Matt would, so I got out of my car and headed over to the playground. I climbed to the top of the dome-shaped jungle gym and sat in my usual spot on the cool metal. I watched the sky turn from light blue to pink and orange on the horizon as the time ticked by. My paranoia grew every minute I was out there, but from my position I could see everything around me. If anyone or anything appeared, I'd see them long before they got close. I checked my phone over and over again, but had no word from Matt. When he did finally arrive, I'd been there for over 20 minutes. He pulled up, parked next to my car, and jogged over shortly after. Man, it's been a minute since we were here last, he said when he was close enough. What happened to be there in 10? I asked, masking my anger poorly. Sorry, I got a bit distracted. But I'm here now. That's gotta count for something, right? I guess. So, what's up? He said as he climbed to sit beside me. I sighed and looked down at my interlocked hands in my lap. Despite an extra 10 minutes of prep time, I hadn't even thought about how to bring this up to him. Gummy worm? Matt asked. I turned to face him and saw he held a freshly opened bag of gummy worms in one hand and was offering me a few with the other. Sure, thanks, I said, taking the treats. We sat in silence for a bit, eating our candy and watching the sky continue to change. I knew time was short, though. I wanted to get out of town while there was still daylight if possible, so I finally spoke up. Listen, Matt, this is really hard for me to talk about, I began. It's okay, bro, he said. You know I got your back no matter what. I turned my head to look at him and he beamed at me. Then his eyes grew wide. Aw, man, don't tell me you're coming out to me right now, he said. What? I replied. Matt laughed. I'm just saying, you told me your parents were having a fit and you didn't want to be at home right now, so I just figured, you know? No, dude, that's not it at all. Oh, that's good. Not that I wouldn't accept you if you were gay. It'd just be weird for me. I just stared at him incredulously. Okay, I'm sorry. Tell me what's up, he said, popping another gummy worm into his mouth. I took a moment to gather myself again and then spoke. Do you remember homecoming, when I freaked out and ran from the bleachers to go home? I asked. Yeah, I remember, Matt said while chewing. You said you were real sick and had to go home. Yeah, that night. Well, I wasn't really sick. I was freaked out because I kept seeing a faceless person in the crowd. Matt furrowed his brow and turned to look at me. What do you mean? He asked. I then explained everything from that night onward. I explained the reason I took pictures of the businessmen when we were out and my parents' reaction when I told them about it. As I talked, Matt's expression turned more and more serious. By the time I was done, he wasn't facing me anymore. His head and eyes cast downward to the wood chips below us. An uncomfortable silence passed before either of us moved. I can't be around you, Matt said, jumping off the jungle gym. He hit the ground hard and straightened up, still not looking at me. I'm sorry, Jake, he continued. My parents warned me something like this might happen and told me to get as far away as possible from whoever told me about it. He began to walk away, and I leapt to the ground to follow him. Wait, Matt, please, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. I don't know who else to turn to or where to go. I'm scared, man, please. He continued walking without saying a thing. So, you're gonna forget me, just like that? I spat, venom replacing the desperation. Everything we did as kids, all the shit we got into in high school, all the times I was there for you, you're just gonna forget that? This is different, he said as he unlocked his car. How? I shouted. How is this different? Dude, I don't know what's going on or why everyone is ignoring me. Can you at least tell me that? I feel like the only person on Earth who doesn't know what's happening. Matt got into his car and started the engine. My heart sank at the thought of him just driving away, but instead he rolled down his window just enough to talk to me. It doesn't have a name, he said, still not looking at me, but my grandma called it Gesichtsdieb. What the hell is that? I asked. It's German. I don't know what it means. Look it up when you get a chance. Okay, but... Before I could say another word, Matt put his car in reverse. I slammed my hand down on the roof of it to stop him. Matt, wait, I yelled. He didn't move, but also didn't put his car back in park. Let me stay at your place tonight, please, I said. One night, that's all I'm asking. I just don't want to be alone if this thing is going to come after me. Indecision played across Matt's face. I felt bad for doing this to my friend, but I just needed the one night to get my feet under me and come up with a real plan. Okay, he said, after a long pause. One night. Follow me home. You know where it is. With that, he backed up quickly and sped out of the parking lot. I hopped in my own car and sped all the way to Matt's place. We got there in record time, and Matt walked with me inside, though he still gave me the cold shoulder. His parents greeted me as warmly as ever, and it almost brought me to tears, thinking that I'd more than likely never get this response from my own parents ever again. When they asked why I was coming over so late, Matt chimed in with his coming out of the closet story, and I didn't argue. The rest of the night was spent in Matt's room, going through bouts of silence, broken up by the occasional game of Halo or Mario Kart. Most of the time we just sat on our phones or watched Netflix. We both agreed to go to sleep around midnight, but before we really got settled in, Matt started digging through his closet. After a few seconds, he pulled out a backpack and his old Nintendo Switch. He put the handheld into the bag and began filling it with snacks from the hidden stash he kept under his bed. When he was satisfied, he moved over to his stack of games and looked at them for a moment before turning to me. "Which ones do you want?" he asked. "What?" I replied. "Which ones do you want?" he repeated. "You can't have Smash Bros, though. That one's mine." I knew right away what he was doing. "Matt, I can't take," I began. "Look, if you're going to be out on the road, then you'll need something to entertain yourself," he said, looking back at the games. "So which ones do you want? If you don't pick, I'm going to pick for you." In spite of my misgivings, I took Mario Kart 8 and Breath of the Wild. "Shit, I'll throw in Puyo Puyo Tetris for free," Matt said, dropping the game case into the bag. He zipped it up and handed it over to me. I hesitated for a moment, but took the bag from him still. "Thanks," I said, placing the bag next to my spot on the floor. "Don't mention it," Matt said. He turned off the lights and got into his bed while I got comfortable on the floor. I knew sleep wasn't going to come easy for me, but I managed to drift off after a little while. I was awoken in the middle of the night by loud clanging downstairs. It sounded like someone was sifting through pots and pans in the kitchen. I sat up and checked my phone. The time read 4:36 a.m. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I looked over to Matt's bed and found it vacant. His blankets were strewn aside and the door to his room was open. My heart began racing in my chest as I got up and crept over to the open door. I peeked around the corner and saw Matt crouched at the top of the stairs. Light came from downstairs on the left side, which led into the kitchen. "Shh!" I hissed as quietly as I could. Matt's head whipped around so fast I thought it'd twist right off his neck. Relief washed over him as he realized it was me, and he gestured for me to come to him. I inched my way out into the hall and crouched over to him. "I think someone broke in," Matt whispered when I was close enough. It was then that I noticed he held his pocket knife in one hand. "What should we do?" I asked. Before Matt could reply, the clanging downstairs ceased. We both tensed and stared at the bright doorway just below us. We didn't hear any footsteps, but the lights in the kitchen suddenly went off. Something that shouldn't have been possible, since the light switch was a good 8 feet away from the stove and cabinets. Now bathed in darkness, we crouched there in silence. My eyes had adjusted to the bright light, meaning I was basically blind until they readjusted to the darkness again. They never got that chance, though. Even in the shadows, I could see it poke its faceless head around the corner from the kitchen. It moved with mechanical smoothness, stopping just where the nose would be, and only exposing the top half of its head. Its hand reached out and gripped the corner of the wall, as if to steady itself. No, not to steady itself. It was getting ready to pounce. "Matt, we need to move," I whispered, tugging on his shirt. "That's my mom," he said. In the heat of the moment, I'd forgotten that the creature didn't have a form of its own. It always had to borrow one. Matt, she's gonna be fine, I promise, I pleaded. Right now, we need to get away from it. Normally, it would vanish as soon as I looked away, but something was different now. I'd seen it move. It was in a position to attack. I didn't know what would happen now, but that same instinct to run screamed inside me like it had during homecoming. Okay, let's go, Matt said. We both began to move backward, but the creature mirrored it by moving closer to us. We stopped, and it stopped. My heart pounded impossibly in my chest as I realized we were at a stalemate. As soon as we made a break for it, so would the creature, and I'd put money on it being faster than the two of us. Run, Matt hissed through gritted teeth. What? I asked. Go get the bag and climb out my bedroom window. I then remembered that Matt's house had an old metal trellis just outside his bedroom window. We'd used it tons of times to sneak in and out of his house when we were younger, but that was years ago. It's not gonna hold me, I said. It will, he said. I used it just last week to go see Kylie. I knew there was no arguing with him, and a small part of me hoped that if I ran, perhaps the creature would chase me and forget about Matt entirely. Thanks, was all I could say to him before I slowly crept backward. As expected, the creature mirrored my movement. I stopped, took a breath, and went for it. I turned as quickly as I could and bolted for Matt's bedroom. I heard the thing rush up the steps behind me, followed by Matt's scream. In one fluid motion, I grabbed the bag he'd prepared for me and ran for the window. Thankfully, we'd kept it open last night, so I was able to burst through the screen and hang on the windowsill. I got my feet planted on the trellis just as the sound of footsteps raced towards me from inside. I reached down with one hand and grabbed the metal just as a steel grip took my other one. An ungodly crunch sounded through the air as the creature gripped at my fingers so tightly it felt like they were broken. As if I weighed nothing, it began to pull me back into the window. But I screamed and pulled back. My arms stretched unnaturally, and more pain flared from my wrist to my shoulder. I thought it was going to rip my arm clean off when I heard Matt scream again from inside. He collided with the creature and stabbed the hand that held mine with his pocket knife. The creature's grip loosened, and I managed to slip free. The force from my pulling caused me to fall backward off the trellis and hit the ground hard. All of my breath escaped my lungs, and I lay heaving on the ground, hearing the sounds of a scuffle up in Matt's room. My friend was screaming still, but it wasn't in defiance anymore. It was terror and pain. I got to my feet and stumbled through Matt's backyard and around his house. I got to my car, started it, then laid on the horn. Hey! I shouted at the top of my lungs. I'm out here, you son of a bitch. Within seconds, the front door to Matt's house opened, revealing the thing standing there. Now that I had its attention, I put my car in reverse and peeled out of Matt's driveway before bolting down the road. I checked the rearview mirror, but didn't see it following me, which I took as a good thing. I drove for as long as my gas tank would let me. It was about 8 a.m. when I had to pull over for gas in a town I'd never been to before. Now, in broad daylight, with minimal people around, I took a second to sift through my bag. I found a granola bar, ate it, then went out and paid for some gas. Once I was filled up, I continued my journey for another couple hours until coming to a rest stop at about 10 a.m. I went inside, bought myself a lunch, and withdrew every penny I could from my bank accounts. Then, with cash in hand, I kept going. After a few more hours, I found a wayside and pulled over. I wasn't particularly tired, but I had to take a break from driving and figured this random wayside would be devoid of people for a while. I leaned back in my seat and rubbed my forehead. I reached into the bag for another snack, but my head brushed against something soft and rubbery. Confused, I pulled it out and remembered Matt's old Switch was in a cheap carrying case. With nothing better to do, I opened up the case and took out the console. That's when I noticed the cracks along the screen and realized I must have landed on it when I fell from the window. My heart sank as I stared into my own fractured reflection. I prayed that it still worked and turned it on. The screen came to life with the Nintendo Switch logo, and not too long after showed a perfectly clear menu. I breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that this was a sign Matt himself was okay. Unfortunately, I'd left my phone charging in his room the night before, so I had no way to find out what had happened. For the rest of the night, I oscillated between playing games and sitting on the trunk of my car. There wasn't much else to do, since I didn't want to drive anymore. The one night I had to plan was wasted, so I took the time to plan out my next move, but was too tired to really think of anything solid. I went to bed just as the sun began to set. When I woke up the next morning, a dense fog had settled in the area around the wayside. I couldn't see hardly 30 feet in front of me. The air was cool when I got out, though, and it felt really good to stretch my legs. I soaked in the silence, thankful at first, but then it hit me that everything was too quiet. There were no bird songs, no bugs buzzing, and nothing rustled in the forest next to the wayside. Even the wind was calm. A steely fear crept into my veins, and I quickly got back into my car. The automatic headlights came to life with the engine, and their sudden brightness pulled my eyes to the front of the car. I switched them to the fog light setting and was about to put the car in drive when a dull smack radiated from my passenger window. The steely fear I felt before turned to ice, freezing me in place. It was stupid to look. I know, I should have just drove off and never looked back. But people are curious creatures, so I did look. On the other side of the window was the Gesichtsdieb. It was still possessing Matt's mom, from what I could tell. Her pajamas were covered in mud and blood, scratches and cuts clearly visible across every inch of its body. It had one hand coated with dried blood pressed against the glass. Everything else about it was as you'd expect, only this time it had a face. It had taken the skin off of another person's head and stuck it onto its own head like a sick mask. It had facial features, like a mouth and eye sockets, but beneath them was just bare flesh. My breath froze in my throat as it reached up with another hand and pushed up the corners of the mouth, forming a smile. That's when I recognized the face of my best friend. His smile was undeniable. I don't remember much after that, just a lot of pavement through teary eyes. Over the next few years, I traveled the country, working odd jobs that paid cash while sleeping in my car. It was during one of these jobs that a coworker of mine mentioned a job opportunity in Alaska. I was hesitant at first, but then I remembered the creature's aversion to cold. Nowhere in the US was colder than Alaska, so I asked him for more details, and he got me in touch with the guy running everything. Suddenly, I had plans to travel to Alaska in a couple weeks. During this time, I decided against my better judgment to head back to Riverstone. It'd been a long time since I was there, and I knew I'd probably never get to go back once I was in Alaska. So, I went. I went to Matt's house first. The cars out front looked like his parents', but they were both caked with dirt. The grass had also grown very unkempt, as if it hadn't been cut in months. All of the shades were pulled down, blocking me from seeing inside. Not that I wanted to, of course. Then I went to my old house. It was abandoned, but not totally destroyed. All the doors and windows were boarded up, trash littered the yard, and the grass looked just like Matt's. Otherwise, it was as it had been the day I left. I looked up to where my bedroom had been on the second floor and felt a tug in my heart at the memories. "Jake?" a female voice said from my right. I looked over and saw a girl who looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place a name to her face. She wore an olive green sweater with black jeans and a beat-up pair of Vans. Her hair was blonde, and she wore glasses in front of her sea-green eyes. "Don't recognize me?" she asked, taking a step forward. "No, I'm sorry," I said, leaning back against my car. "Jake, it's me, Kylie." Immediately, I recognized her. Though when I last saw her, she wore band tees and had jet black hair. I guess the blonde was her natural color. "Oh my God, Kylie." I began, standing up straighter. "It's okay," she said, holding up a hand. "I'm not mad at you." I'm sorry," was all I could say. She pursed her lips and looked down at her shoes. "You know, he called me that night," she said, looking back up to me. "When you were driving to his house, he called me. He told me what was going on and was unsure about letting you stay. I told him he was being ridiculous and that it was just one night." She sniffled and tears welled up in her eyes. "He said he wanted to go with you," she continued. "Said he didn't want you to face this alone, but he was afraid of leaving me behind." Her sobbing grew stronger, and she placed her head in her hands, muffling the tears. I just stood there in silence. "As afraid of that thing as he was," she continued after a few moments, He knew he'd never live with himself if he didn't help you. So I told him to go. I told him to help you. Another pause. That was the last time I spoke to him, she finished. She wiped a few tears from her face, and I offered her some tissues that I kept in my glove box. Once she was composed, I spoke. What are you doing here? I asked as kindly as I could. I figured you'd be over at Matt's. His parents don't want to see me anymore, she said. I told them what I just told you, and they didn't take it too well. And their house isn't abandoned, yours is. I come here to make sure no one vandalized it. I appreciate that. Another silence passed between us while Kylie composed herself a bit. I'm sorry. I know it was a while ago, but it still hurts, she said. Believe me, I get it, I replied, glancing back up at my old house. So why are you here? She asked. I explained how I'd been living the past few years, the job in Alaska, and my desire to see the town one last time. I left out the part about the Gesichtsdieb and Matt's face. Wow, was all she could say, turning to look at the house with me. Kylie and I had never been super close. We only knew each other through Matt since they were dating. In that moment, though, we were both walking down our own memory lanes, each slightly different, but both rooted in my old house and Matt's life. I remembered coming home from school with Matt by my side as we ran up to my room to play Xbox. I remembered riding our bikes through town, stopping at various parks to just hang out and talk with our friends. I remembered sitting with Matt at Bury Park, talking about anything and everything that came to our minds until the sun was setting and we had to leave before it got dark. Everything was much simpler then. In the blink of an eye, it was all over, and years stood between now and then, an impossibly long distance. A familiar chill ran down my back, pulling me out of the memories. I looked to my right, at the nearest street corner, and saw the creature there. It's taken over some poor woman who'd been walking her dog. The animal tugged on its leash, urging the woman forward, but the Gesichtsdieb didn't budge an inch. Despite its ghastly appearance, which I'd grown accustomed to, the thing didn't have any malice in its glare, like it was letting me have this moment, but wanted me to know it was still there. Hey, you okay? Kylie asked. It's there, I said, not breaking my stare. In my peripheral vision, I saw Kylie glance over at the woman. She looked for a moment, then turned back. Where? She asked. Right there, I said. That woman walking her dog. Jake, there's no one there. I continued to stare at the creature without saying another word. I could feel Kylie getting tense next to me, but I didn't care. I wasn't gonna let this thing scare me off. That's when it did something I would have never seen coming. It reached up with the woman's free hand and placed her index finger and thumb about where the corners of her mouth would be and pushed them up. Panic welled up in my gut, and I tore my gaze away from the monster. I began shivering like it was 20 below outside and hunched forward as nausea rolled over me. Holy shit. Jake, are you okay? Kylie asked, placing a hand on my back. I swallowed the impending vomit and took control of my breathing. After a minute or so, I felt good enough to stand back up. I looked over to where the creature had been, and thankfully, it was gone. I need to leave, I said. Thank you for watching the house, but it's okay if it rots. I don't care anymore. Kylie stood back and was about to argue, but stopped herself. The look on my face told her I wasn't going to budge. Well, reach out when you get to Alaska, okay? She said. Will do, I replied. Looking back, I feel sort of bad for not following up, but I just can't bring myself to message her. So, Kylie, if you're somehow reading this, I'm sorry. But that brings me back to where this post started. I've been in Alaska for a bit now, and will be heading north soon. The creature has been around, but it seems hesitant now. It's appeared to me from farther away than usual and hasn't made moves to get closer. Maybe it knows what I'm planning. Regardless, I'm going through with my plan. I can only assume the change in behavior is due to my actions. So pushing onward is the best thing I can do. I won't have an internet connection where I'm going, so don't expect any updates after tomorrow. I wouldn't post even if I did, to be honest. I'd rather leave all of this behind me and try to live my life as best I can, for as long as I can. Matt, I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're at peace wherever you are. But that was just the beginning. Now let me tell you about something far more sinister. The American sleep experiment. Eternal sleep would be a mercy. for previous parts. Watch our yesterday video and subscribe to our channel. Day 12. Beginning to wonder if there's any point in keeping count of days anymore. The only way I know is by consulting the clocks around the facility and my computer. But who knows if those are accurate? I haven't seen the sun since the shutters came down, and at this point, I don't know if I'll ever see it again. Wish I would have enjoyed my time outside more while I still had it. The subjects are all still alive. I don't know if we've passed some sort of advanced regeneration point, but we did take a blood sample for analysis from 2. He was still alive, something torturing him. It's like the invisible force that ripped him apart would wait for his wounds to scab over, taking their time then poking hard at the healing skin, making it bleed again as they pulled the id off. He couldn't do anything but scream in pain. One didn't seem catatonic anymore at all. He had passed into a new point, one where he was bright-eyed and awake for the first time in days. He started talking to us, with nobody in particular as his target, just open-ended questions. 1. So, what are you in here for? What did you do? Want to know what I did? Shut up, stop singing. Oh, that's not me. 4. Please let me go. Please just let me out of here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. 3 was huddled in his corner again, facing inward and muttering how he was going to teach someone a lesson, and they would listen to him after all was said and done. We got the answer on that pretty quick, because he was the first to respond. 3, I needed to teach that bitch a lesson. She wanted to get uppity, and I had to show the kids what happens when you get like that. How they should be a man. A woman is supposed to submit to her husband, damn it, and if she won't, I've got every right to punish her. What's so wrong about living by God's word? 1. Ooh, that's the woman beside you. Huh, looks like she brought the kids for a visit. You show them their place too? 3. They would have ended up just like her if I hadn't saved them. They would have been ungrateful whores to any man they were lucky enough to have. I kept them pure. They died pure. Taryn looked like she was going to throw up. I made a motion for her to leave the room, going back to her room for some quiet. She shook her head, refusing to be shaken once again. The woman was showing strength I hadn't seen since my mother passed, and that was a high bar. 1. Damn, dude. At least I just shot up a school because they were bullies. There's 2 mysteries solved now. 1 was a shooter and fit the stereotype, honestly, while 3 was a family annihilator. I lost a lot of the pity I had for either of them through the experiment then, especially when 1 started describing his spree. 1, it was really easy to get shots off in a school. Have they changed that yet? I've been locked up for years, so I've only been told hearsay. God, back in my day you could just walk right in with a 12 gauge in hand. I can see Erica standing right over there. Speak of the devil. Not sure if she's looking at me or not though, since there's not much to her face anymore. Oh, I think I get it now. They appear how they died. That's why your family is soaking wet, right? 3, I drowned them. 1, would you use bathtub? Baptize them in the old river downstream? Come on, tell me. I tied cinder blocks to their feet and threw them in our pool. Damn, that's intense. Good on you, buddy. Innovative. How about you, Jeffrey Jr.? What are you in for? None of your damn business. Oh, the little group around you says otherwise. Lots of hospital gowns. They look fucking delirious too, more than all of us. I was trying to help. Help what? The Grim Reaper? Shut up. Calm down, boss. We know what you're in for. Look at all these girls. I lost fucking count, and they look pretty young. Care to explain? Fuck you. 1. Yeah, don't think we needed any explanation anyway. Honestly, I look like a saint compared to you fuckers. 4. Please, shut the fuck up. What do you guys think the other guy had? I saw a bunch of burning body parts around him. I know the default answer is probably arson, but my personal theory is that he was in charge of some major war crimes. Those things looked obliterated and cooked. Like well done cooked. He was relishing this at this point, even though he was missing half of his organs. This son of a bitch was commanding the room like a storyteller, spilling everyone's darkest secrets. When he looked at us, I felt my blood run cold. 1. Now you, lady, I understand that you're innocent of any crime. I'm sorry you're about to go through this. Now you two, though. He looked squarely at Philip and I. leveling eyes at us like lasers set to stun. We were frozen in place, entranced by his act of psychological torture. 1. You have 2 people. Now, I don't think a good guy like you would do something like that intentionally, right? They're pretty mangled, after all. 1 only has a part of his head. Ha, we should be friends. He gestured to his own head, the flattened part bulging out now from brain swelling. Philip wouldn't answer upon hearing that, shutting down in fear while his mind pondered the ramifications. They were likely the friends he had killed in his drunken joyride. Oh well, you're probably going to see them yourself soon. You though, who's the woman? The electricity in my spine from the gas was nothing compared to the bucket of ice that was just injected right into my bone marrow. I know who it is, I just can't bear to fucking say it. Kind of a dick move if you killed an old lady. Hell, the only one in here who doesn't have something hanging around is that guy. He pointed to Murray then, giving him a thumbs up. 1. Well, things are only about to get worse. Kirk over here is telling me that they're going to torture me in ways I've never imagined. 2 was screaming for him to shut up now, as 1 just started to laugh again, taunting all of us. He had passed the point of sanity, but just might have achieved something beyond it at this point. All of us left, going back to the dining table and sitting in silence for a time. I'm so sorry, Philip started whispering under his breath. I don't know if he was telling us, himself, or the things that were probably still following him, but he broke down sobbing eventually. I wandered off to read for a bit, trying to find anything to calm my racing mind. Even after all this, I'm trying to come up with some sort of scientific answer. Despite all my logic, though, the real evidence in front of me is supernatural at least. Day 13. I've had bad doses of irritability, but nothing like this. God, every small sound is terrible, making the headache I've been nursing for days only get worse. Philip has taken to being a recluse in his cot, crying on and off in between long dissociative episodes. He would just stare at the wall, not even bothering to pay attention to the food we brought him. We offered food to the subjects still inside, but all refused, saying that they weren't hungry anymore. Every one of them is exhibiting the same symptom now, seeing other people around them that are seemingly from their past. It's getting hard for me to focus. I'm having my own episodes of dissociation. Sleepwalking is probably the best way to put it. Cognitive function isn't doing so great either, so forgive me if there are words misspelled in future entries. Assuming there are future entries. I hope I can keep going. Day 14. 5 got up on his own today. After laying in the medical bay since he caught fire, screaming in pain as his skin started to slough and peel off, he got right up and walked out of the room. I don't know what was driving him, but he started beating on the windows, now shuttered from the outside since the shutdown started. Bits of skin and streaks of blood left marks all over the glass, with his fists banging against it in vain like a solemn funeral drum. If only they could have funerals. Examination of blood samples shows that, while the cells can be broken down and individually destroyed to the point of irreparable damage, they can't outright die. It seems that something is keeping them here, making sure that they're trapped in this hellish limbo. It's my belief that this correlates with the healing process during sleep, with the lack of rest, leading to cells going into a sort of preservative stasis instead of going through regeneration as they would during REM sleep. It's essentially a state of conscious cryogenics, frozen to keep them alive while they feel everything. 2 is still being tortured by whatever is there. I fear once we get closer, I'll start seeing these phantoms that they've been seeing. 3 began to choke earlier, coughing water from his lungs as he struggled for breath. It just kept coming from nowhere, gallons of it that at one point mixed with blood from the pressure on his lungs. The more disturbing thing was 4's reaction to it, shrinking back in fear as he saw the water beginning to pool on the floor. He looked wild-eyed, terror in his face as he fell back, trying to get as far away as possible from it while beginning to choke himself, throat violently spasming, muscles contracting so hard they were visible to the naked eye. I'm afraid of what will happen when we reach that point. 4 is still holed up in his room, almost foaming at the mouth as he stares around, shouting on occasion at the specters around him. Fia, I was trying to help you, I swear. I stopped watching around that time, tired of hearing the laughter of one as he watched the carnage. I noticed that every so often he would jerk, body convulsing momentarily before a bleeding hole would open up wherever it originated, invisible bullets puncturing his skin. I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I can still find something that will help with my disease, but I'm not sure. I'm afraid I'm going to be trapped in this hell. Day 15, I've started hearing voices, all kinds of different ones, some louder than others, and sometimes more than I can discern, all talking over each other. I'm assuming this is only the beginning, and I've started hearing the sounds the subjects have been listening to for days. The eerie song that Two has been complaining about is horrible. It's just some sing-song threats set to an off-kilter tune that nobody can decide the melody to. It's like a musical straight from the pits of hell, all sung by young girls. It's terrifying. I hear screams too, and the occasional gunshot. I think everyone is just jumbling together being in such close proximity because it's hard to pull anything meaningful out of the mess of noise. I think the worst one is the sound of muffled screams, the wails of someone unable to breathe as they desperately shout for help. I can feel my mind going more, cognition slipping bit by bit as the hours wear on outside. Two has stopped screaming, at least seemingly numb to the pain now. I'm sure it's only a matter of time before he suffers some new horror, though, because the little girls' voices are getting much louder as time went on without his screams. After some time, Taryn joined me, looking in at the scene in front of us. The floor by 3 was almost flooded at this point, and there was still water gurgling from his mouth on occasion, though he was laying sideways on the floor now, almost unable to move from the convulsions in his lungs. Red tinted the water, with small chunks of flesh coming out every so often. I'm theorizing his lungs are beginning to break from the stress, tissue peeling off as he coughs up more water. 4, I've deduced, is showing signs of rabies infection. I don't think it's something he had before either, as the symptoms have onset much more rapidly than any noted study. He was salivating wildly, foaming at the mouth as his own spit made his throat swell up, desperately rejecting the water with great pain to him. He was sweating, drenched, and curled up in the corner, peeking around him with unintelligible grunts. I don't know that his eyes were registering anything he was seeing, but the inflammation in his brain was certainly affecting his recognition. Do you think there's like a point of no return? Taryn asked, breaking the silence between us. She almost made me jump, forgetting she was there in my current wake and dream state. Those guards died, right? But none of the subjects have. Maybe we'll be safe if we kill ourselves now. How do we know if we're not too far already? I asked. I'm further than any of you. I had a 48-hour head start before we got gassed even. I'm hearing shit, Taryn. I don't know when I'm going to start seeing things, but I know it's not going to be pretty. One way to find out, she said, picking up a shard of broken glass still on the floor by the observation window and running it across her forearm, straight down the middle. Blood began to gush from the wound, pouring to the ground at our feet in splattering drops. She looked at me as the life force left her body, yet nothing changed. Even as the blood poured down her arm, she stayed conscious, staring right at me as tears began to roll from her eyes. If she's already at that point, I know I'm absolutely past it. It would have been better if we didn't make it out of this alive, but our hubris is going to make sure that we're here, awake for every screaming minute of this fucking hell. We parted for the time, both going to ponder what was in store for us, or try to think of a way out of this damned place. I doubt we have anything that can break the windows in, but we'll see what we can do. Maybe we can get some clean air coming in here some way. At this point, I'm ready to try anything. You think that was terrifying? Wait until you hear what happened next. My son's baby monitor is talking to me. My son will be 1 in just a few days, so my husband and I have decided it is time to sleep train. We have got to get our flare back, and the only way we know to do that is to get our son out of our bed. So one night last week, we jumped on the opportunity as our son was extremely tired, and it was now or never. I ran into his closet to find the unopened baby monitor. We have had no reason to use it so far. It is a nice little monitor. I had gotten it at the baby shower, brand new from my dad and stepmom. I know you've probably all heard of the creepy stories of monitors that connect to Wi-Fi and someone will connect to it and talk into it. So for that very reason, as the well-researched mother I am, I only asked for one thing: no Wi-Fi needed monitor. Of course, my stepmom and my dad heeded my wishes and grabbed a no Wi-Fi needed baby monitor. So fast forward to the day we began the sleep training, I was so excited. I knew I probably wasn't going to be getting much sleep in these upcoming nights, but hey, what mother really is sleeping anyways? Then 7 o'clock hit, and it was finally bedtime. We did our nighttime routine, so baby boy didn't suspect anything different. But after bath and lotion and one last nursing session, I laid him in his crib. Surprisingly, he fell straight to sleep. Thank you, daycare. And I was so happy for him, and even happier for the reconnection my husband and I were going to share. Around 12 a.m., I woke up naturally patting the spot next to me. But of course, there was nothing there. My baby was in his crib, and I should have been ecstatic, but I started to cry. I was going to miss this season of life and miss his sweet snuggles at night, but I knew this was something that needed to be done. I pulled my phone off the nightstand and started to scroll on Reddit. Then I heard the weirdest thing coming from my end of the monitor. "Hi, Mommy." I jumped but didn't want to wake my husband. My baby is only 11 months. He doesn't say much of anything other than the goo goo gagas, mama, dada, and the occasional hat. He loves hats. I rubbed my eyes. Many times I had gone delusional in the middle of the night, so I chalked it up to that. I did double-check the monitor, though, and saw my little angel peacefully sleeping. Around 2 a.m., my internal alarm clock woke me again. Not even knowing what to do at this point, I again grabbed my phone and hit up all my usual games and social medias. But as I was scrolling, something weird happened again. "Why are you ignoring me, Mommy?" This time I screamed. I know I definitely heard something, as the monitor lit up green, indicating someone was definitely talking. My husband groggily rolled over and barely even opened his eyes, and then drifted back off. I snatched the monitor so quickly and stared for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was maybe only 5 minutes. Nothing was out of place, and yet again, my baby was happily in dreamland. Something in me told me to rush to the room and grab my little boy, but you know the age-old saying, never wake a sleeping baby. So I didn't, but mother's intuition is always right, and I should have listened to it. Too late now. All I can do now is sit back and ponder all the mistakes I made that night, because somehow I slowly drifted back to sleep. My alarm went off at 5:45 a.m. I work at a local daycare and I bring my son along with me. I got myself dressed and I brought the monitor into the bathroom with me just to make sure he wasn't awake while I was doing the boring morning things. I brushed my teeth quickly, went to the bathroom, and then grabbed a diaper and lotion to get my boy ready for his day. But as I was getting his clothes picked out, the monitor turned green again. But nothing was said, just a hushed laughing sound. I thought for sure that was my little man waking up. After all, he is a bubbly boy and loves to laugh. Then the monitor turned green again and I heard something that will forever haunt me. "You shouldn't have ignored me, Mommy." I ran to my baby's room in a panic. I did what I should have done the first time I heard a peep out of that thing. But to my horror, my son was nowhere to be found. He just had recently started pulling up on things, so I thought maybe he had managed to escape the crib. I searched everywhere, his favorite hiding spots, his closet, my bathroom, but he was gone. I yelled louder than I think I ever have, and my husband came running. Again we searched, but it was as if that sweet boy had just vanished. We of course called the police, but no leads yet. So for anyone reading, should I call a priest? Is this something paranormal, or was my son abducted? I guess I wasn't as well researched as I thought. While one nightmare ended, another was just beginning. Call 0989 for a long time, not a good time. "I think that might be the wrong way round," I said, smirking. The message had not been inked, but engraved into the plastic laminate partition. It's the staple of any public bathroom stall. A number that, let's be honest, is either false or owned by an unwilling participant of a bad practical joke. But this message was different. Unlike the other musings and doodles on the cubicle wall, it caught my eye. That was no meager feat, considering it was 3 in the morning and 10 bottles of cider were sloshing around in my belly. It wasn't the unbalanced handwriting that entrapped my gaze, not even the brown trail of rust left in the grooves of the etching. So, what if an inebriated moron had written his phone number with his house key? That didn't interest me at all. My curiosity was piqued by the length of the number. 4 digits. I didn't ring it, of course, because I didn't expect that the call would actually connect. That, along with the backwards wording of the message, started to poison my intrigue. There was an omen lurking in the message. I didn't like any of it, but I shook my head, realizing that my drunken mind was playing cruel tricks on me. If a drunken stranger had written the message, it would make sense that he'd only remember 4 digits of his number. It would make sense that he'd mix up a common saying, too. Get a grip, scaredy pants, I told myself, chuckling as I struggled to aim my stream away from the seat of the toilet. The fuck are you yapping about? Mason slurred, slipping on the damp floor as he pulled my cubicle door open. I zipped up my jeans and drunkenly grinned. Trying to sneak a peek? Keep your fantasies to yourself, Alec, Mason said, swaying listlessly in the doorway. Now, what were you saying, Tosspot? I don't remember, I admitted, laughing and shrugging. Something about the wrong, my friend hazily began, pausing to belch. Something was round? I don't know. I slapped my head in realization, then jabbed a pointing finger at the cubicle wall. The message. I was saying it's the wrong way round. Mason crouched, squinting to read it. It's missing, like 3 numbers. I snorted so hard I choked. Mason, it's missing a few more than that. You're drunk. So are you, he protested, standing up with hands on his hips, then stumbling into the opposite cubicle wall. True, but at least I have more than one brain cell left, I pointed out. That isn't saying much, considering you only started with 2, Mason retorted. I laughed. Damn. Yeah, he replied, tapping his temple with a grin. See? Even tipsy, I'm witsy. Witsy? I asked, giggling. Witty, he corrected. I was searching for a smart reply when I noticed that my friend had produced his phone from the front pocket of his jeans. My inebriated friend's bobblehead hindered his ability to focus on the screen, but I already knew from the tone of the phone's digital clicks that he was dialing a number, a short number. You're not serious? I asked as the phone started to ring. It's not going to work. We'll see, won't we, Mr. Smart Alec? Mason asked, mashing the phone against sweaty hair in a completely failed attempt to meet his ear. That name hits the spot every time. Yeah? I scoffed, rocking from side to side. So does your mum. My friend laughed, shoving me into the green, rickety wall of the cubicle. My mum's too wonderful for you. You're too wonderful for you. The phone had barely stopped ringing when the response sounded through the speaker. I heard the voice with such clarity that I twisted my head to ensure the responder hadn't appeared in the cubicle. As my friend and I locked eyes, I knew that we felt the same chilling sensation, the same chilling realization. Mason should not have called that number. Who is this? My friend calmly asked, struggling to sober himself up. Who is this? The voice parroted, speaking in a misshapen way. Mason started to pant, his chest bloating and compressing rapidly as he trembled on the spot. I tried to control my breathing, but I knew why we're both so afraid. There was background noise behind the voice on the other end, and that sharp, spiky audio didn't signify bad reception. Something was hidden in the static of the call. Hang up, I said. I reached towards the phone in Mason's hand, but he retracted it and shook his head at me in absolute terror, as if to say that ending the call would be a dreadful idea, as if he were hearing more than me. And I wonder, sometimes, whether he'd simply been trying to stop me from hearing it too. I trusted my friend, as I'd never seen him that way, possessed by terror that surpassed even my own, and I'd certainly never been so frightened in my life. His transformation became fully apparent when a drunken pub-goer stumbled into the bathroom. The barfly that locals call Barmy Barry, but only because he does, in fact, act a little barmy if we don't. Fuck off, Barmy, Mason yelled. The old, disheveled gentleman wore a matching waistcoat and corduroy trousers, as if he were either attending a funeral or preparing to perform amateur magic. And knowing Barmy Barry, it may well have been both at the same time. I was actually relieved to see him, relieved to be drawn back into the real world and forget, for a second, the unsettling nature of the phone call. What are you boys doing in here? The grumbling man mumbled as he walked towards our cubicle. Lo, I joked. You're blowing each other? Barmy Berry gasped. I sighed. No, Barry, it's... Never mind. Barmy Berry, he corrected. Just get out of here, my friend icily ordered. Barmy Berry narrowed his eyes. I'm going to tell Michelle that you two are up to no good. I'll be back to check on you if you haven't left in a few minutes. And then I'm taking a piss, okay? Once you've calmed down. Bye, Baza, I said as the man exited the room. My friend summoned a deep breath. It was only Barry, I said before gulping. Just hang up the phone, Mason. We don't need to keep talking to him. Who is this? The phone voice repeated with that horridly unnatural timbre. Mason ignored me and started to reply. This is Mason, the voice interrupted, answering its own question. The two of us quaked in the bathroom stall. Nobody had mentioned my friend's name. Not me. Not Barmy Berry. Yet this mysterious voice knew. I pleaded with silent eyes for Mason to hang up the phone. To my surprise, in spite of the unwilling look on his face, my friend nodded. But as he started to lower the phone from his ear, the voice on the other end spoke again. Why are you listening to Alec? Don't you want to enjoy a long time? It whispered. Before my friend responded to the voice, the door to the bathroom stall swung closed, sweeping my friend out of the cubicle with unholy force. Mason, I shouted, instantly grabbing the handle. Something was wrong. I sensed it before I'd even opened the door. Sensed, somehow, that I would be facing a new land when I stepped outside. I was both right and wrong. The grimy, stained, neglected bathroom still stood before me, but its pieces had been scrambled. Before me was the familiar row of sinks, but it stretched much farther, much like the row of cubicles beside me. And when I twisted to face what should have been the room's far end, I found only a long tunnel. The two walls, lined with sinks and stalls, were no longer straight and finite. They curved sharply to the right, and whatever lay around the corner was just out of sight. Alec, a familiar voice cried. My chest tightened. Mason? I replied, voice cracking as it barreled down the tiled chamber ahead. There did not come a second response from my friend. However, a few seconds later, the sound of a shutting door echoed down the tunnel towards me, seemingly carried by a far-off breeze. It became clear to me that I wouldn't find the bathroom's end once I rounded the corner. A thought confirmed when I finally took ginger steps out of the cubicle, skidding slightly in the same mystery puddle that had nearly claimed my friend. And after following the curving tunnel for only a few steps, I saw that I was correct. The bathroom continued ceaselessly. The two walls did not meet some end wall. I did not see an exit beside the last cubicle on the right, for there seemed to be no last cubicle. All that awaited was a never-ending passageway of sinks and stalls. I didn't want to follow the bend. I had a feeling that I should wait in the first cubicle for the nightmare to pass. But I knew, if I were to do that, I would be turning my back on Mason. As I walked farther and farther from the faux safety I'd felt in the initial cubicle, I tried to focus on my trainers clapping against damp tiles. But the persistent echoes of distant noises drowned each step, no matter how heavily I walked. Far-flung faucets gushed, poorly oiled stall hinges groaned. Doors locked or unlocked. Every sound typical of a public bathroom, which would have been banal in any other circumstance, seemed to excavate a fresh layer of fear from the pit of my stomach. I held my sanity together with duct tape and faith. It was when a not-so-distant sound emerged that I finally unraveled. Only 3 or 4 cubicles ahead from me, a stall door closed. But not before I had a chance to scream at the sight of translucent fingers gripping the plastic. The invisible skin revealed cobwebs of arteries beneath the flesh and the green of the door on the other side. And each finger unwrapped from the edge of the door, one by one, before it closed. I shivered on the spot, fully prepared to turn on my heel and run back to the starting cubicle. But I was close to finding Mason. Not that I had a sixth sense. It was more that something in the never-ending bathroom, likely the voice of 989, had shown me the way. I pressed forwards, being sure to keep my eyes ahead and avoid the cubicle that housed the translucent creature. But I felt something peeking through the gap alongside the door hinge. Felt eyes upon me as I passed the occupied stall. Eyes or something worse. I only know that its gaze was tangible, a look that punctured my flesh and injected my body with a chill that froze the very tears forming in my eyes. And to exacerbate the horror, as I continued to walk, there came a shape, either a shadow or some black specter, which slipped around the corner ahead, just past my field of view. Whether a shadow or not, I had no doubt that it had been very real. Then I saw what I had never expected to see. Not the force behind this madness, but the end of the tunnel. An end to the march. The far bathroom wall loomed ahead, and given that I finally saw the last cubicle on the right, I had to pray that the exit would stand just beyond it. But what mostly caught my attention was the man facing the exit, the man with a phone pressed to his ear. "Mason?" I whispered. A dissonant melody, played by what sounded like a violin submerged in water, sounded from the device in my friend's quaking hand. But what frightened me more was that Mason looked different. His stubble had flourished into a beard. In the revealing glow of the room's fluorescent light, there even seemed to be wisps of white in there. The same was true of the matted hair on his head. My friend was older, impossibly older. It's an illusion, I told myself, quivering on the spot. Has to be. "I'm on hold," Mason quietly told me, continuing to face the closed exit ahead. "Any year now, he'll answer. You watch." "Year?" I fearfully wondered. "Let's get out here," I urged, trying to ignore the impossibilities stacking up before me. "The door is right there. We don't want to open that, Alec." My friend replied in a low tone borrowed from somewhere dark. Mason's sudden composure terrified me. His trembling had ceased, and I clamped my jaw shut in response. Then, once I stopped shaving away enamel with my fearful grinding, I realized that the hold music had stopped. There came a voice from the phone's speaker to confirm that. "I'm here, Mason," the inhuman voice announced in a sing-song timbre. "Thanks for holding." The exit clicked open. I saw only the edge of the door swing past the edge of the final cubicle, but that was a blessing. I was fortunate to not see whatever stood, sat, or hovered in the doorway. To not see what Mason saw. His expression told me that. Even the most expressive face should not be able to convey such a level of fright. I'm glad I didn't look at my friend's eyes. I fear that I would have seen a reflection of whatever stood in the open exit. "Oh," Mason knowingly said. But my friend's sole word did not slip into silence at the natural stopping point. The utterance was dragged out like some zombified moan from the oblivion of a brainless skull. Mason was gone. There was nothing left of him upstairs. Nothing worth salvaging after his very sense of self had been obliterated by a terror too great for human eyes. Then came the most haunting event. "No," I shrieked. But it had already happened. With inhuman speed, my friend raised fingers to his eyes and started to claw with long nails. The two of us screamed in unison as he tore his retinas, but he kept going, did not stop. He tore until bloody ribbons spilled from the mush-filled sockets. He tore with no sense of self-preservation, only the maddening desire to never see a single thing again. And that was clearly a gift to Mason, as it would prevent him from ever having to see the source of the voice again. 10 seconds later, long after my oldest friend had rid himself of his vision, he finally stopped clawing. My friend sighed with relief, painting his face with a wide smile. He seemed somehow to be in less pain than before. "That's better," he said. But it wasn't Mason. It wasn't anyone I knew at all. I screamed for the 10th consecutive time, lungs starting to give out, but my friend did not turn to face me with his eyeless, blood-strewn face. Did not utter parting words to someone who'd been his friend since childhood. He walked towards the exit, then the door slammed shut behind him, welcoming Mason into an unknown world with an unknown thing. The same door flung open a second later, and a gray-haired man wearing Windsor glasses burst into the bathroom. "What the fuck is happening in here?" Barmy Berry cried. "Alec, why are you crying?" I turned around, cheeks painted with tears and snot, to find that the curving tunnel had disappeared. The bathroom had returned to normal, but Mason was gone. As one chapter closed, a darker one was about to unfold. Dr. Diablo. The smoldering sun broiled my forehead as I made my way down a back alley in Tijuana. The road was made of broken bricks of various shades of red, each rising up to different heights above the level that would have made them flush. I suppose at some point in the distant past, they were new and beautiful. Back then, the alley probably saw more traffic than it does now, I thought. Up ahead, and to my left, there was an old wooden door in the side of an abandoned building. It looked like it had been a grocery store specifically meant for tourists at some point. Now it sported shattered windows, graffiti, and trash clogging up the front entrance. A young Mexican boy named Pedro stood a few feet to the right of the door and was pointing at it and staring at me with a very concerned expression on his face. "Senior," he exclaimed, "please, go to my uncle's rug shop. You don't want to go in here." I stopped in front of him. "This is that doctor's office I asked you about, right?" He lowered his arm. "See, but you should not go in there. My cousin knew a boy and his friend's mommy went in there and never came back out." He pleaded. "So, your cousin's friend's mother?" I asked. "Sigh, he cried for 3 weeks." I gave him a crisp American $20 bill and thanked him for showing me the way. He turned exasperated and walked away slowly. I returned my gaze to the old wooden door hanging crookedly on rusty hinges with its chipping pastel green paint. I'd come a long way from San Diego for this. I'd lost my job, and with it my health insurance a few months earlier. Having come down with a lung condition afterwards for which a treatment did exist, I'd found myself in a financial situation which put that treatment out of reach for me. A friend of mine had heard of a doctor in Mexico who offered the treatment at a fraction of the price, and that led me here. They said his name was Dr. Diablo, which didn't set my nerves at ease. The condition of his office was also causing me concern. But this was Mexico. Things were different here. I shouldn't expect the same kind of clean, shiny offices like we have in the States. In fact, I was feeling kind of guilty for even worrying about it. "You can't judge people like that," I said to myself. "It's kind of racist, and I certainly didn't want to offend the good doctor." So I took a deep breath and exhaled it slowly, imagining the stress draining out of my half-clogged lungs as I did. I felt better after that and slowly opened the door. It squeaked. The floor of the hallway inside creaked as my foot pressed down on what seemed flimsy plywood covered with linoleum tiles. There was another door just inside that led to a small room with a reception desk and a couple of cheap folding chairs, the metal kind you might find at some public school function. No one was there, but a box fan was on in the corner, blowing the hot air around, as if pretending to keep the room cool. There was a little bell on the desk, so I rang it. A minute later, a man came out from a back room. He was middle-aged and dressed in a white t-shirt and blue jeans. He had dark hair and a mustache. He looked me up and down and then examined an open notebook. "Ah," he said, "you must be the American." I nodded. He smiled. "You know I'm an American too. You see, Mexico is in North America, so we are both Americans." "That's right," I said as he laughed. I guess this was supposed to be funny. I appreciated him trying to give the situation some levity. "You left your phone at your hotel like we agreed?" he asked. "It's in my car. I haven't checked into a hotel." "Oh, I see." He scratched his chin and thought for a few seconds. "You know the Federals are always trying to shut us down. We can't take any chances. Where did you park your car?" "It's in the lot behind Hernandez Emporium." "Oh, that far? Good. That's good. Okay, the doctor will see you now. Just follow the hallway, and when you get to the door, go down the stairs." He then retreated into the back room through the door he'd come out of. The hallway was the only other way out of the room. It was dimly lit with fluorescent tube lights that barely let out a glow and a window to the right. A small wooden cabinet was on the left. The floor seemed to be concrete under its worn and peeling paint. There were a couple of closed doors in the short corridor and an open one at the far end. I walked through and entered the open doorway into a dark hallway, which had a few open doors on either side. I looked into those rooms as I walked past. The first one had boxes on the floor and several shelves on the far wall. On one of these shelves, I noticed several glass jars with strange-looking contents. A few seemed to have dried up fungi or plant specimens, but a couple had small skulls, which seemed to me to be from small monkeys. I wondered for a moment if this guy was some kind of witch doctor, but then I stopped myself. No, I thought, there's no place in my thought process for that kind of cultural bigotry. I'm sure he's just a collector. The next room had a padded table in it with extensions for arms and legs, which included leather straps. Again, I had a moment of fear. If someone were strapped down on that thing, they'd be helpless for any psychopath to have their way with. "Stop it," I said to myself. I'm sure it's just for violent mental cases. They have these at insane asylums to protect the staff from out-of-control nutcases. The third open door was to a room with cinder block walls and a single dim light in the ceiling. Hung on the walls were what seemed to me to be medieval instruments of torture. Apprehension filled me up in an instant, and I almost turned to leave. Then I came to my senses. What are you, some kind of racist? I asked myself. Just because you're in Mexico doesn't mean that every doctor is some kind of fly-by-night quack or serial killer. How do you know what those things are for? Are you a doctor? Did you go to medical school? Okay then. I reached the end of the hall, and to my left was the stairwell. I followed it down into the cool basement level. The drop in temperature was a relief and set me much at ease. The basement was comprised of 2 rooms from what I could tell. The first was a small waiting room with several chairs and one fluorescent tube light, flickering and buzzing away as they do. I sat down to wait, and the doctor entered, a minute later, through the only door. He wore a white lab coat and had a traditional stethoscope draped around his neck. His eyes were bloodshot and set back into his head within crater-like structures on his heavily creased, leathery face. He bore a black mustache and goatee, which, along with his tattooed right hand, gave me the impression of an East LA gang member. Otherwise, he looked like any ordinary doctor you'd see in any normal hospital. "Gringo?" he said. "You here for the lung infection?" I nodded. "You got the money?" I handed him a folded stack of cash I had set aside in my pocket. He counted it, then fixed his eyes on me. "Okay, come in the back." I followed him through the door into a small operating room. The place was a mess, wires from various machines on the floor, dusty old equipment everywhere, and one of 2 surgical lights broken. Pale blue tiles went halfway up the wall and wrapped around the room. Above that, cheap wooden paneling had a chipped and peeling light green paint job. The surgery table was in the center, and was the only thing about the room that looked normal. He instructed me to sit on the table, and so I did. He fumbled through a cabinet and pulled out a thick metal wand-like thing, which was attached to a tube which he hooked up to a machine. When he turned it on, it made a whirring sound. "Now open your mouth up," he commanded. "I gotta check your lung pressure." I opened my mouth wide as he lurched forwards like a madman, shoving the thing deep into my mouth. He held my face with both hands, one on each side of my mouth, pulling the skin hard as if forcing me not to close my lips. He pushed, and I fell back on the table as the wand slid halfway down my throat. I could feel it vibrating in my neck. It seemed to be alternating blowing and then sucking air in. I thought he was trying to kill me and was using the front of being a doctor to lure in unsuspecting victims. The man was strong, and I couldn't pull the wand back up. I began panicking as I choked. He howled as I did. "Just take it, Gringo. Just take it." Just as I was about to suffocate, he pulled the thing back out and calmly turned and approached the machine the device was hooked up to. I rubbed my neck and breathed in deeply as he flicked a few switches on the unit. He said. He turned to face me. "Well, you definitely got a problem, hombre." He started fumbling through another cabinet. He was just used to people fighting the procedure. "It's a reflex. I mean, shoving something down someone's throat. I'm sure everyone fights it." Of course, I thought. He's not a psycho. It's just his style of practice. A wave of shame overtook me for thinking otherwise. Here, he was just trying to make a living. And I come down here from the United States with all my privilege and prejudices, thinking he's some kind of criminal. Just then, he turned around from the cabinet, having retrieved another instrument. It was a set of black pressure sleeves, like is used to check blood pressure. Only they were huge and all connected. He wrapped the largest section around my torso, and then 2 long ones around my legs, and 2 more, full sleeves, around my arms. He velcroed them shut and flipped a switch on a console behind him. The machine it was attached to droned on loud like a vacuum cleaner as the wraps began to fill with air. "We need to make back pressure," he laughed. I was fine with it until the pressure from the device got really high and it began to hurt. He turned around and retrieved a small vial of clear fluid from a small metal box on a shelf. Perhaps he didn't realize that the pressure was too high, I thought. I called out to him to make sure. "Ah," I toned loudly. "It's starting to hurt. Maybe turn it." The pressure was so high I couldn't get the words out. It was getting hard to breathe, and my eyes felt like they were about to burst. He turned around with an evil grimace on his face. "Amigo," he shouted over the noise. "Drink this." He forced the fluid from the vial into my mouth, and even though I tried not to swallow, I felt it drain down my throat. "Taste good, huh?" He laughed in sarcasm. I was struggling to sit up, but it was no use. The pressure sleeves were stiff and hard as a rock. He pulled some other instrument from a cabinet and turned back to face me. It had a long black hose attached to it and a power cord. The end in his hands was a long black metal rod. I focused in on it and could see the tip had a small open hose end on it next to a rotating conical drill bit. He held it up towards my face and began to approach me. Absolute mortifying terror overwhelmed me. The grimace on his face had now transformed into a crooked, evil grin. I squirmed and writhed as I struggled to get off the table. He laughed and laughed the closer he got to my face with the thing. "Good night, gringo," he yelped with glee. If only I had listened to Pedro. That little boy had tried to warn me. Then everything faded to black. My vision, the sound, my consciousness. I could hear the box fan's soothing hum. It was warm again. The lights came up as my brain rebooted, and I tried to remember where I was. I was on a chair, in the front room of the office. I was alive, but I felt a little woozy. He must have drugged me. I looked up. That male receptionist guy was there behind the counter. "Feeling better, amigo?" he asked. I sat up straight and breathed in deep. The clogged up feeling in my lungs was gone. I could breathe perfectly. Whatever he had done had worked. I stood up and looked at the man. "Yeah," I said. "I feel great." He smiled and nodded. As I approached my car, Pedro spotted me from inside the emporium and came running. He called out to his family, some of whom walked out to have a look. "You came back," he shouted with joy. We met at my car, and his mother and older brother were close behind. The boy gave me a hug while he cheered at my safe return. His family members soon joined us with big smiles on their faces. His mother stopped smiling for a second and held my face with both hands. "Did you go inside?" she asked. "Did you let Diablo treat you?" Yes, I replied. "I feel fine. He did a great job." She got a sour look on her face, and then unexpectedly pulled my shirt up and pointed to the side of my torso. I looked down and saw a long line of stitches just below my rib cage. When I got back to the States, the hospital verified that he had removed one of my kidneys. I contacted the authorities and heard back a few days later. They had coordinated with the Mexican police and raided the building. But there was no sign of Dr. Diablo. The whole office had been thoroughly cleaned out. The only thing they found was a broken glass jar with a monkey skull inside and a box fan. That story may haunt your dreams, but the next one might steal your sleep forever. Raven Creek Manor was a name spoken in hushed tones, a place that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who heard it. Shrouded in darkness, the sun seemed unable to fully penetrate the thick, oppressive fog that enveloped it. The old mansion stood on a hill overlooking the town, a constant reminder of its tragic past, looming like a specter over the lives of the townsfolk. Each weather-beaten stone and darkened window held secrets, breathed of sorrow, and whispered tales of woe to those brave enough to listen. The locals often told stories of a family that met a gruesome end, their souls unable to find peace, forever trapped within the cursed walls of the mansion. Decades had passed since life last stirred in the manor, its halls now silent, echoing only with memories of what once was. The once vibrant gardens were now barren, and the fountains, choked with weeds, were a stark contrast to their former glory. The dry, cracked fountain stood as a symbol of life that had long since ebbed away. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay, a chilling reminder of time's relentless march and the inevitable decline of all things. Few dared to approach the manor, its ominous presence casting a long shadow over the town, a lingering reminder of the darkness that once, and perhaps still, resided within. The town's name was Raven Creek, and for me, the unknown had always held a certain allure. Abandoned places and the echoes of forgotten lives called to me, and Raven Creek Manor, with its grim history and forbidding facade, was no exception. One cool autumn evening, I found myself at the foot of the hill, gazing up at the manor. The setting sun cast an eerie orange glow across the facade, and the windows gleamed like the eyes of a predator. A shiver ran down my spine, but my curiosity outweighed my fear. The old oak door creaked open, its hinges groaning under years of neglect, as if warning me to reconsider. The air inside was stale and cold, thick with the scent of dust and decay, a testament to the passage of time. As I stepped inside, my footsteps echoed in the oppressive silence, each step amplifying the eerie stillness. Shadows danced in the flickering light of my flashlight, playing tricks on my eyes, making me question what was real. A low groan echoed from the depths of the house, followed by the distinct sound of floorboards creaking upstairs, as if someone, or something, was moving. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of my growing fear. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or the house settling, but deep down, a primal fear stirred within me, warning that something was terribly wrong. I cautiously made my way up the grand staircase, each step accompanied by creaks and groans. The wood beneath my feet felt ancient, as if it might give way at any moment. The air grew colder, the silence heavier, and I felt as if I were being watched. Every breath I took echoed in the vast emptiness, amplifying my sense of isolation. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed a door shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The force sent a shiver down my spine, heightening my sense of vulnerability. I spun around, heart racing, and saw shadows dancing, playing tricks on my mind. That's when I saw it, a figure slowly emerging from the darkness. Its presence was both terrifying and mesmerizing. At the end of the hallway, shrouded in shadow, stood a motionless figure. Its very stillness was menacing, tall and gaunt, with long, sharp fingers that scraped against the floor. The sound, like nails on a chalkboard, sent chills through my body. Its eyes glowed an unnatural white in the darkness, piercing me with a look of pure malice. Those eyes seemed to see right through me, knowing my deepest fears and darkest secrets. Terror gripped me, and I ran towards the figure, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. But as I approached, the hallway stretched, growing longer with each step. The figure remained just out of reach, its eyes never leaving mine. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. I stopped, panting, my flashlight beam flickering across the empty hallway, but the dread lingered, clinging to me like a shroud. I was not alone in this house. I turned to leave, my heart still pounding, but as I did, I noticed something strange. The hallway behind me had vanished, replaced by a solid wall. Panic surged through me. I was trapped. A cold, raspy voice echoed through the empty hall, seemingly coming from the walls themselves. "You are mine now," it whispered, sending shivers down my spine. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and I realized I was trapped in Raven Creek Manor with a malevolent entity. It had only just begun to play with me. If you thought that was disturbing, the next tale will crawl under your skin. There's something strange about the little boy from down the street. Our new house was in a nice little neighborhood on the outskirts of a large metropolitan city that wasn't known for its hospitable reputation. So you can imagine my relief when I found my little family, a cute little abode in a mostly retirement-age community. While there was no age requirement, almost all of the residents of Springcrest Village were 60 years old or older. They'd abandoned the busy city life to live out the rest of their days in a new upscale community where they found fellowship with people with shared life experiences. Springcrest had everything they could ever need. It was situated right next to this fancy golf course, ideal for keeping those old joints moving. A well-maintained pool, excellent for keeping their aging skin nice and leathery for all to admire. Most importantly, there were no schools nearby, which meant no pesky children to ruin the old folks' peace and quiet. We drove into our new picturesque life and were met with a multitude of smiles and waves. Ricky and I are a middle-aged couple, something rather strange to see driving down the roads of Springcrest Village. Maybe they thought someone's adult children had come by to visit Mama and Papa? I imagined them thinking as we drifted past the identical housing. Everyone seemed really kind. That is until they noticed the Penske truck tailing behind our little Corolla. Their faces changed from looks of welcome to emotions of disgust, some gesturing over to their spouses to come and look at the impending tragedy. The yellow moving truck sped past them, and I saw a few grumpy old men throw their hands up in frustration. So much for a warm welcome. I thought to myself. I looked over at Ricky as he journeyed onward, unfazed by the many twisting looks. Our car slowed over to the side of the street, coming to a halt in front of our new forever home, leaving the driveway spot available to the moving truck. The movers got straight to work. As the rolling door on the Penske truck clinked against the metal stopper, the sound of metal on metal echoed through the quiet neighborhood. "Let's get to work, boys." The driver yelled at his mostly college-aged laborers. The commotion brought many silver-haired women and gray beards to the windows, some coming out onto their lawns to show their disapproval with their hands placed firmly on their hips. To say that I was extremely uncomfortable was an understatement. I itched my arm in an attempt to quell my nerves. Ricky noticed my uneasiness and wrapped a hand around my shoulder. His embrace worked for the most part, and the old folks looking on slowly vanished from my mind as I looked up at Ricky's face of admiration, taking in the sight of our little 3-bedroom home. "Mom?" I felt a tug on my pant leg and looked down to see Daniel, our 7-year-old son, trying to get my attention. "What is it, honey?" I said as I patted a hand on the back of his head in a comforting gesture. "Look," he pointed to the neighbor's rose bushes. It took a minute to realize Daniel hadn't suddenly become an avid rose connoisseur. Beyond the many reds and whites of the flower petals, through the thorned bushes and hidden behind a little angel statue, were a pair of little eyes peering out at us. It was a little boy. I breathed a slight sigh of relief when I realized that Daniel would not be the only child in our neighborhood. "It's okay, honey. Go say hi." I gave Daniel an encouraging shove as he hesitantly took a few steps forward. "Hi." Daniel quivered, but the boy behind the statue seemed to shy way behind the angel's comforting stone body. Daniel looked back over at me, searching for some kind of instruction. I waved him forward. He took a few more tentative steps. I'm Daniel." Daniel outstretched a hand in a manner we taught him to do, a cordial introduction. The boy seemed to completely disappear behind the angel as his hands now gripped its hard exterior. Daniel took a few more steps until his arms brushed up against a few roses. Just then, the frightful boy darted through the foliage, snagging his shirt on one of the thorn branches. His little orange t-shirt, ripped as cotton fabric, clung to the sharp twigs. With surprising agility, he leaped over some of the rose bushes and disappeared from view. Daniel stood there confused. Granted, I was too. "Strange boy," Ricky said. "Yeah, strange indeed," I said under my breath while still trying to make sense of the situation. "Come on, Daniel, let's go pick out your room," Ricky shouted. Daniel snapped out of his surprise and ran his little feet into the house. Just then, I too came out of my stupor. "Wait, take your shoes off, it's new carpeting," I yelled. As we all walked through the door, I couldn't help but return my gaze to the little angel statue. Once again, the boy's little eyes peered out from behind as the door slowly creaked closed. Daniel was homeschooled. We'd never trusted the public education system. Often, kids don't get the attention they require. Most times, they are just names on some roster. Ricky and I knew this. Soon after we got married, we concluded that I would stay home and school our children ourselves. Hence, our disregard for adequate schooling near Springcrest Village. Unlike many other home educators, we as a couple felt we were more than qualified for the task of molding our young son's mind. Ricky was a professor at a community college about a half-hour's drive from our new dwelling, and I had my master's in social work, though I no longer practiced. Ricky made plenty, and I had my hands full with our rambunctious 7-year-old. On this particular day, Daniel and I were working on long division. Yes, our second grader is slightly more advanced than the normal school curriculum, something Ricky and I love to take credit for. This aptitude, however, did not grant him the same level of patience. Mom, I don't get why I have to learn this stuff," he whined while laying his head on our kitchen table, his eyes firmly planted on the vivid imagery coming from the other side of the window. "Now, Daniel, I know this is hard, but you have to try and focus. Just a few more practice problems, and we can stop for the day," I informed him. To my annoyance, he returned a disrespectful grunt. I couldn't help but scowl at his rudeness. I reached for the ruler on the table and planted a mild slap on the tip of his nail bed. "Ouch!" Daniel retorted, bringing his hand to his mouth while huffing a few hot breaths of air as if the mist could ease the pain. He eyed me with a mild sense of anger. Yes, I hit my son. His eyes slowly started to melt from a look of anger to one of understanding. Sorry, Mom, he said as he lowered his eyes. It's not often that a kid relinquishes his emotions when they know they did something wrong, which made me proud of my boy. I caressed his face, squeezing his cheeks and forcing him into a pucker. I brought my nose in and glided it back and forth on his like I used to do when he was a baby. I'm Sowie, my little cupcake. My baby voice made him shy away. Mom, he said with an inflection. I gave a mild chuckle. Just then I saw his eyes turn to the window, a look of surprise plastering its mark on his face. I turned to whatever caught his eye and gave a slight jolt as my eye met the glass. On the other side stood the boy from the first day we'd moved in. He was dirty, wearing the same orange shirt as the day he spied us from the rose bushes. His arms were scratched, visible streaks of red running down his skin. It must have been the rose bushes that had done it. His face had an aura of judgment to it. It's that boy, Daniel whispered. The boy on the other side would not lose his connection with my son. Seconds turned to minutes, and it started to get a bit awkward, more than it already was. Mom? Daniel said with a questioning change in pitch. Can I go say hi? I looked into my son's eyes and realized that it had been some time since he'd socialized with someone his own age. Guilt washed over me. Sometimes I forget that Daniel needs to interact with people his age. I gave him a somber smile. I could tell Daniel knew I was mulling his question over in my mind. A grin inched his way across his face, one that said, "Come on, please." I slammed the book sitting on the table shut. Okay, go, but we have to do a few extra problems tomorrow. You're the best mom, he said as he shot out of his chair and made his way to the front door. I remained sitting at the table as I lost Daniel from view, but just then I remembered the kid at the window. A shiver ran down my spine as his eyes were glued on me. I don't think I'd ever seen the boy blink. That is until I saw eyelids closing horizontally. My skin crawled. His gaze trained on me, the sound of the front door unlatching in the background. From the right corner of the window ran Daniel, an excited pep in his step. Come on, let's go play. The strange boy lost his connection with me and ran off onto our front lawn, falling on the grass and rolling around in its green pigment that now added to his already filthy shirt. Daniel tagged him and the boy gave chase. The two ran out of sight. I stood there contemplating what I'd just seen, Ricky's words on move-in day replaying in my head. Strange boy. Strange. Strange indeed, I whispered. Later that evening, Ricky, Daniel, and I sat eating at the dinner table. It's our custom to accompany Ricky for a good meal after a long day's work. Ricky recounted the frustrations of his day. The administration wants us to skim over half of the textbook. They say it's too controversial to teach Shakespeare's plays. I mean, the themes may be difficult to stomach in some instances. Sure, there's death, suicide, and murder, but it's great literature. Ricky was a talker, even more so when he was passionate about something. That is one of the reasons I fell in love with him. But I have to admit that sometimes I just let him ramble on, nodding my head whenever I thought he posed a question, smiled when it seemed appropriate, and asked a few questions here and there. I'd come to know how to navigate my husband, but Daniel seemed to find it difficult to learn how to stop his father's long-winded speeches. I looked over at him as he pushed around his peas with his fork. He noticed me watching him as his father continued speaking of Shakespeare's greatness. I knew something was weighing on his mind, but he couldn't find the right moment to speak. I attempted to halt Ricky's soliloquy. I mean, Ophelia. What a character. I have to say that Hamlet is my favorite play of all time. Honey? I tried to interject, but my first attempt failed at arresting his talking points. I mean, to be or not to be, what a line. Honey? And the ghost at the beginning of the play, talk about goosebump. Ricky. I finally got him to stop. He looked at me as I gestured over at Daniel's sad face with my eyes. It took a second or two, but he caught on. I outstretched my hand, tapping Daniel's arm. Are you okay, baby? Ricky looked at both of us and awaited an answer. Yeah. I could tell that he wasn't telling me the truth. I looked over at Ricky before gently pressing my line of questioning further. Are you sure? You know you can tell us anything, right? I said to him as the gears turned in his head, presumably trying to formulate what he was trying to say. I clasped his hand, giving him as much comfort as I could. He finally looked into my eyes and spoke up. It's that boy from earlier today, the one with the orange shirt. I looked over at Ricky, his eyes made the connection. The boy that was hiding in the roses? My husband asked for clarification. I could tell that my husband had interrupted Daniel's train of thought, and I waved him off. Yeah, Daniel spoke in a shaky tone. What is it, honey? What about the boy? I could see the sorrow in his eyes. Well, it's that I'm worried about him. I don't think he's okay. My frustration grew as I just wanted him to spit it out. Go on, I said in a forced calmness. Well, we were playing outside, and he knocked over the neighbor's trash can. The scene replayed in his mind, and he started eating the stinky food that spilled out. I tried to make him stop, but a long dramatic pause followed, and Daniel swallowed hard. Well, he scratched me. Ricky erupted in laughter. All of this over a scratch. It's just how boys roughhouse. When I was your age, my brothers and I would... Just as Ricky's next speech commenced, Daniel lifted his shirt, thrusting the words back into his father's throat. My heart sank as far down as any mother's would upon seeing their child wounded. Down the side of Daniel's rib cage, across his oblique and stopping at his pelvic bone, were 4 deep scratch marks that looked like they came from a bear rather than a child. That did not look like roughhousing to me. There's more, Daniel said quiveringly. How much worse could it get? I thought to myself as my hand guarded my open mouth. Well, his grandma, or what I think was his grandma, came out when she heard me scream. And well, she put a collar and leash on him and then sprayed him with a water bottle. The kid tried to scream, but I could tell the collar hurt him when he did. A shock collar was the first thing that came to mind. I looked over at Ricky to see him speechless. It's not often he's left without words. Honey, what's the kid's name? I asked him, but he gave me a shrug. He doesn't talk. I don't think he can. My former profession as a social worker did not prepare me for the things coming from my kid's mouth. I looked at the ceiling as I tried to find the right words. When I found them, I returned my attention to Daniel, but before I could speak, a figure caught my eye in the dining room window. I gave a shriek that made everyone turn to the glass. It was the little boy, a black collar around his neck, as he stared at me with as much intensity as he did earlier that day. I was paralyzed in shock. Ricky stood from his chair and ran to the door. I heard him shout, "Hey, wait." The boy's head shot to the porch light before he darted off into the rose bushes, disappearing into the dead of night. You have to call the police. You're not a social worker anymore, Ricky whispered as we lay under the covers of our bed. I understood what he was telling me, but I needed to go see what was happening myself. There was something in the kid's eyes that gave me the impression that he was asking me for help. Me, not the police or social services, but me and me alone. I knew if I tried to explain my logic to my husband, it would just fall on deaf ears. You wouldn't understand, I said to him. You're really going to go over there yourself tomorrow, aren't you? I didn't respond. My resolve was conveyed by my silence. Ricky knew I was a bit hard-headed. He just gave a frustrated grunt. Well, at least wait for me to come home tomorrow, and we'll go over there together. The request seemed valid, though I would be antsy all day until he got home from work the next afternoon. I rolled over and planted a kiss on his lips. I think he took that as me agreeing to his terms because he drifted off into a restful sleep. I, however, stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night. I was already wasting time lying in bed while that poor child suffered in some horror house. As soon as the opportunity presented itself, I was going to see about the boy from down the street. The morning light shone through the window as I lay in my bed, building the courage to walk down the street to the little boy's house. Ricky had gone to work about an hour prior, but my resolve from the night before had drifted away at some points during the night. There's something about the warmth of a cozy bed that washes away all bravery. So many thoughts had run through my head throughout the night, but no matter what, the image of the little boy being tortured never left my mind. I thought of the shock collar cutting into the skin on his neck, of his filthy clothes, of the scratches on his arms. Had they really come from the rose bushes? I thought to myself. Finally, I managed to slip my legs out from under the sheets. I sat there contemplating my next move. How was I going to confront the woman abusing that little child? "Mom?" Daniel's little voice called from the door. I looked over at him and I could see bags under his eyes, the glow of sweat covering his skin, and an evident urgency in his face. "Mom, I don't feel good." His voice was extremely shaky. Like a lioness to her cub, I rushed over to my baby as if I was going to be able to scare off whatever illness was plaguing him. I palpated his forehead. "My God, you're burning up." His little body shucks under my touch. His knees seemed uneasy. Just then, I felt him give a slight stumble. I arrested his fall before he regained his feet through his own will. "Come on, let's get you back to bed," I told him. We shuffled off into the quiet house. After some Tylenol and some breakfast, Daniel's fever had finally come down. He now rested comfortably under his Transformers sheets as his little breaths gave a slight snore through his stuffy nose. He was fast asleep. I was extremely relieved. As I gazed at my son's face, I couldn't help but wonder how anyone could abuse a little child. The images of the little boy were rearing their head again. I looked at my phone, noting the time, 11:23 a.m. I grunted in my frustration. It would be another few hours until Ricky got off work. The little boy's injuries tormented my existence. The memory of his blank stare cut into my soul. I know he was trying to tell me something. Just then, Daniel's words from the night before replayed in my thoughts. "He doesn't talk. I don't think he can." How was this boy supposed to ask for help when he'd probably been shocked by a collar every time he opened his mouth? I walked out of Daniel's room and over to the front window. A few houses down, I could see where the little boy lived. I gripped the hem of my robe while looking back at my son. He's going to be asleep for the next couple of hours. I thought to myself, just enough time to go see about this boy. I opened the door and walked out into the morning sun. Every step I took, I could feel my heart pounding harder and harder. I'd seen child abuse cases many times in my former profession, but no matter what, I could never get used to the horrors I was faced with. I don't know how some people could become numb to these situations. I never could. That's part of the reason why I quit. The walk seemed quicker than I'd liked. I was now inches from the house's front door. I raised a hand to knock, but just before my knuckles could grace the wood, something brushed up against my leg. I looked down to see a striped cat purring as it rubbed itself on my shin. Something caught my eye on the cat's collar. There was a little blinking square attached to it. This wasn't an ordinary collar. It was a shock collar. I heard another meow from the door. I hadn't yet noticed the doggy door at the foot of the entranceway. Poking its head out was a Siamese, as you could guess, a shock collar around his neck as well. Just as the cat's tail exited the doggy door, the larger door it was attached to swung open. In the center of the frame stood a tiny old lady, and then the worst smell of my life hit my nose. From behind the woman came the putrid smell of shit, urine, and death. As the woman held the door open, half a dozen other cats walked their way to the door, some walking up to my feet and rubbing their bodies on me. My eyes watered as I tried hard not to gag. What the hell do you want?" the woman said in a rusty voice, a rather annoyed one at that. I held my wrist up to my nose, trying to unsuccessfully stop the smell from entering my nostrils. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am, but is this the house of the little boy that's been playing with my son?" The woman eyed me with a mix of anger and slight surprise. No little boys here, only my babies." She gestured to the felines at my feet as more creeped out from behind her. "Now, go away. Days of Our Lives is about to start. Come on, babies, let's go back inside." She spat out in anger, then abruptly changed to a tone of sweetness. As the last cat walked back into the house, the old lady moved to close the door in my face. My social worker instincts kicked in. I reached my hand out and stopped the door from slamming shut. "Excuse me, did you say Days of Our Lives?" "I love that show, but I haven't been able to watch it since we moved into our new house. We're still waiting for the cable guy." I pointed over at my home, just a few doors down the street. "I'm dying to know what happened between Xander and Brady." The woman was slightly taken aback by my hand on her door, but her look of surprise eventually morphed into one of delight. "You watch Days of Our Lives?" she said. "Of course. Best show in the world," I said, fainting my enthusiasm. She took the bait. "Well, come on in. Any friend of Brady is a friend of mine." She stepped aside, gesturing that I could come in. Walking into the house, the smell was no better. I'm not sure what, but something had died in here. Cats are usually very clean creatures, but in this case, they were using the carpet as their litter box. We reached the couch, and I could see that its fabric matched the filthy carpet. "Take a seat. I'll get you some lemonade." I cautiously obliged, perching myself on the very edge of the couch, trying to avoid my backside from touching as much of the dirty fabric as I could. While the old woman rustled in the kitchen, I looked around to see if I could find any sign of the little boy from the window, but there was nothing that signaled a child residing in this hellhole. I looked at the pictures on the wall. Almost all of them were of one cat or another. There must have been hundreds, but one large image did catch my eye. One of the old women and a man about her age sitting on the same couch, surrounded by many, many cats. Just then, the clinking of ice against glass snapped me out of my daydream. The woman was handing me the glass full of lemonade. I reached out and grasped it. I looked down into its contents and saw a few cat hairs floating around inside. I tried not to wince. "Take a sip. Tell me what you think." "It's my own special recipe." The woman waited eagerly for me to taste the beverage. I couldn't blow my cover, so I was forced to press my lips on the brim of the glass, wetting them slightly. I looked back up at the woman, holding back my vomit. Go. Good." The old woman smiled. "My secret is to add mint." As she mentioned it, I saw a few green leaves floating around the cubes of ice. She took a seat on the recliner on the other side of the living room, yet her personal glass in hand. As her rickety bones relaxed onto the cushion, she gave a long, drawn-out huff. Instantly, several cats jumped to comfort themselves against the warmth of her skin. The striped cat that first caressed against my shin at the door now inched its way over her shoulder, across her arm, and stuck its little head down into the glass. I watched disgustingly as it lapped up some of the glass's contents. To my surprise, the woman still raised the cup to her mouth afterward and took a few big gulps. She looked over at me somberly, taking a few seconds to revel in the fact that she had made a new friend. My husband Gerald used to watch Days of Our Lives with me all the time. Now he's so old he won't even get out of bed. She gestured towards a door, off to the side of the living room. "The old gas bag. He's not good for much these days. The good thing about his illness is he is not as chatty as he used to be." She noticed my surprise when she commented, "It's okay. The doctors say that there isn't much to be done for him now, but it's fine. He's outlived all of their expectations. The hospice nurse Jenny said that he'd be dead within a few weeks, but here we are months past his death date, and he's still with us. The whore didn't know a thing about caring for the sick, so I fired her. I can take care of my husband as good as any scrub-touting bitch." She chuckled in some off-brand style of humor unfamiliar to me. When she saw that I wasn't laughing, she shot her gaze over at me. I forced a nervous giggle. Her attention now turns to the TV. Grabbing the black remote on the coffee table, she clicked the power button, and the old box TV roared to life. Nothing but static plastered its mark on the small 32-inch. "These damn cats, they bump into everything." She pointed at the antenna resting on top of the TV. I jerked slightly as I wrestled with the idea of moving the air antenna around myself, but the woman stopped me. No, I'll get one of my babies to fix it for us. Don't you bother your sweet little heart." She raised a shaky voice. "Fluffy. Oh, Fluffy." I heard some commotion coming from the bedroom where her husband supposedly rested. Its door swung open and my senses were completely overwhelmed. Standing in the passage was the little boy. The same one I'd come here to find. The smell wafting from behind the child made me want to off myself. Fluffy is so smart. That's why he's always been my husband's favorite. The woman said as the boy stared at me with the same intensity as he did from the other side of my window. "You know what to do, Fluffy." The woman pointed over at the TV antenna. The boy did not hesitate and ran over to the TV, moving the two metal protrusions around until Days of Our Lives came into focus. "That's a good boy, Fluffy," the woman praised while patting her lap. The boy took that as a signal to run over to her lap. He jumped onto her legs belly first, making the woman grunt as his weight fell on her fragile bones. "You're getting too big for this, you stinker," she reprimanded lovingly. Her hand glided down the back of his head, and to my horror, I heard a very feline purr coming from his mouth. The shock of the situation made me feel woozy, and a heat wave started to wash over me. I had no choice but to take a few big gulps of the hairy lemonade. The woman noticed my shock. "It's okay, dear. You keep drinking that lemonade, it will all be over soon." Her advice sounded valid in my discombobulated state, so I did as she said and finished the glass. I looked over at the little boy and thought I was starting to see things. From the top of his little jeans crested a bushy little tail, and his ears were rather pointed. His eye met mine, his pupils morphed into a long, skinny diamond. Then it hit me. What did she mean by "it will all be over soon"? I looked at her face. She now smiled mischievously as a bout of vertigo washed across my body. Did she put something in my drink? I took to my feet and found it hard to find my center of gravity. I have to get out of here, but as I looked to the door, my passage was blocked by a horde of hissing cats. Fuck, fuck, fuck. I scanned around the room to see my only escape route being the door where the rotting smell was emanating from. I stammered in that direction as quickly as I could. "There's no use in running, dear. You're not going to make it far." The woman giggled as I shut the door behind me. To my horror, the door didn't have a lock. I pressed my back against the entrance, barricading it as I slumped to the floor. When my eyes locked on the bed, I gave a very loud shriek. Atop the bed was the rotting corpse of the woman's decaying husband. The striped cat that greeted me at the door had somehow found its way onto the dead man's chest. The cat's eyes met mine, and it leaped towards me. I heard its little metal name tag clinking with its motion. It curled itself next to me, and the lettering on the tag caught my eye. I held it up, trying to make sure I was reading it right. It read, "Jenny." Wasn't that the name of the hospice nurse? My last thought before my eyes went completely dark. I was awoken by a pounding headache. The light meeting my eyes made me squirm, but my vision became clearer as the seconds passed. I saw that I was laying on the woman's couch. I looked over at the recliner to see the old lady stroking a half-human, half-cat sleeping on her lap. I wanted to scream, but as my breath graced my vocal cords, a surge of electricity ran through my body. I gripped at something coiling around my neck. It was a shock collar. My hands made their way around the collar, searching for some clasp, something I could unhook so I could finally speak. To my terror, there was a little padlock on the back of my neck, trapping me in a voiceless hell. That, however, was not the only piece of metal hanging from the collar. Under my chin hung a little heart with a name engraved into it. It read, "Pounce." The woman laughed. "Do you like it? It's your new name," she said. I tried to make a run for the door, but as my feet darted across the carpet, I received a zap that forced me to the floor. I swiveled around to see the old lady holding a remote control. "You're not going anywhere. You're mine forever." As I lay there, I heard the doggy door swing open and the old lady's screams of excitement. "Oh look, my other new baby made it back home." My heart dropped when I saw the familiar face of my own son squeezing himself through the tiny opening, only he looked different. A little hairier, his ears slightly more pointy, and a judgmental look in his eyes. The woman ran over and placed a collar around his neck too. "I was worried the scratch wouldn't take," she said in relief. Just then the long scratch across my son's body came back into memory. I scanned my own body and found I too was riddled with long, deep cuts. I reached for my ears and felt the horrific sensation of pointed peaks. "Don't you worry about that, you'll get used to them. Soon you're going to be like Jenny there." She pointed at the striped cat perched on the TV. "In the meantime, make yourself at home." Daniel did as instructed and disappeared into the dimly lit house. It took me a while to come to terms with what was happening, but I too decided to do some exploring. I figured it could be a good opportunity to plot my escape. Going from door to door, I found a little office space. To my surprise, an old computer rested atop a desk. While this old machine is slow and needs to be updated, it works well enough to make my plea for help. Someone come save me and my son. Get word to my husband too, because I know that he's going to come looking for us. He already has his suspicions about the house down the street. Tell him to stay away. And for the love of God, never move to Springcrest Village. But not all horrors are trapped in the past. Some are closer than you think. The new store at the local strip mall will grant any wish, but it all comes with a price. It wasn't entirely uncommon to see various stores come and go along our local strip mall. In fact, I recall purchasing a grill from Armstrong's Hardware in the same building that had been a Chinese buffet only a month prior. The stores came and they went. A tale of another family unable to make ends meet. Not much changed around the Oakfield area outside of the carousel of businesses. The local skate park remained dead, and the bowling alley had become a hot spot for purchasing shitty weed and laced coke. School numbers had remained on the decline since the turn of the century, as families filed out one after the other. Anyways, I suppose that's a good enough history lesson on the quaint town of Oakfield, Illinois. A once promising city that would be lucky to be classified as a village now. Here I am, once a man, lucky to be classified as a bum now. I'd made a decent living and a good name for myself during my tenure at the Oakfield Cafe. The food wasn't necessarily fancy, but that's okay. It brought the town comfort. Good old-fashioned soul food. However, things took a turn during COVID, and we were forced to shut the place down. I've been unable to hold down anything ever since, outside of the occasional freelance job. The morning I happened upon Riley's Fungin had been like many which had come before it. In fact, it had seemed markedly better. The air was cool and crisp, the fall was easing in and washing out the heat of a long, dry summer. A perfect day for some job hunting. My parents had always told me that it's better to apply in person than online, so that's exactly what I did. I threw on my cleanest white shirt. All the others had paint stains from previous jobs and a pair of blue jeans, and out I went. I had been actively avoiding applying at the bowling alley, so I decided to see if any new stores popped up at the strip mall since my last visit. My beat-up old Civic bounced and lurched along the decaying roads, fighting the monstrous potholes along the entrance of the mall's parking lot. In total, the row of buildings could house 5 stores, though it seemed one of them always remained vacant. Starting from the left was the longest tenured of the 5, a laundromat which never seemed to have an employee present, no dice. Next to that was Blue's Supermarket, which probably accounted for 90% of the traffic in the mall. Unfortunately, I'd already applied there at least half a dozen times and had yet to hear anything back. Might be worth another shot. Then, right there in the middle, was exactly what I'd hoped for. A new store, a new possibility for employment. Riley's Fungin, the scarlet-colored sign read. Weird name, but it was worth a shot. The door to my Civic squealed in protest as I pushed it open and slid out. I peered up at the sign with the funny name again before pushing the door shut and making my way to the building. I wish I could say that I had felt some sort of the ominous foreboding as I walked up to Riley's Fungin, but rather, it was a sort of cautious optimism. Truthfully, I felt great, like I'd already got the job offer, and my financial burdens would soon be a thing of the past. Those dreams were promptly crumbled up and shot into outer space as soon as I made my way inside. A Victorian-esque couch, the color of crimson, sat lonely in the middle of the vacant room. Several lamps which hung from the wall cast a golden hue over the dark wooden floors. The darkness seemed absolute outside of the lamp's glow. All the windows were shrouded by curtains which matched the couch's red hue. As odd as it all seemed, it was somewhat comforting. My footsteps fell especially loudly in the empty room. This may sound weird, but at that moment I was sure that I was the only soul in the room. As I came closer to the red couch, I noticed a short, mahogany desk sat directly in front of it. Its top was no more than a foot above the floor. A metal box stood in the middle of the desk, with a yellow button protruding from the top. "Hello?" My voice echoed much like my footsteps had. Nobody answered. Against any rational judgment, I decided to take a seat. Almost instantly, 2 more lamps directly in front of me turned on, revealing a chalkboard. In perfect cursive it read, "Welcome to Riley's Fungin, where your wish is our command. Ask the box anything and press the button. Remember, it all comes with a price." The creeps had thoroughly settled in by this point. My heart had begun pounding furiously. What did any of it mean? Anything. I mean, really, anything. I sat dumbfounded on that couch for a while, reading its message repeatedly. It all comes with a price, I thought, all too aware of the empty wallet sitting in my pocket, though even then, I had a feeling that wasn't the kind of price it meant. Hello? I called out once more, hoping anybody would come clarify what this all meant. Obviously, it couldn't be real. This had to be some sort of gag store for some asshole's YouTube channel or TikTok. I looked around the room again, studying the shadows between the lamp's glow. No matter how long I looked into those shadows, no matter how long I let my eyes adjust to that darkness, they couldn't seem to penetrate through that pitch black. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of the fact that I was sitting alone in a dark room of a place called Riley's Fungeon. Maybe people in horror movies aren't as dumb as people make them out to be, or maybe I'm just the perfect person to play such a role. Once again, against any rational thought, I decided to press the button. As my finger lifted from the glowing button, I went still, expecting someone or something to emerge from the shadows and either snatch me up or laugh and scream that I had just been pranked. Neither happened. I returned my gaze to the chalkboard. "Ask the box anything," it said. As greedy as this makes me sound, it took little time for me to decide on my wish. Rent wasn't going to pay itself. "I need $800, please," I said. At first, nothing happened. I sat there feeling like an idiot, getting ready to hop up from the couch and continue my job search elsewhere. Then, from one of those inky shadows in the corner of the room, I could hear the squeal of a door on its rusted hinges. I froze. A tall, slender figure began to materialize through the darkness. I wanted to bolt so badly, but it felt as though my body was frozen in time. A man, or what I assume was a man, emerged from the shadows. He was adorned in a black suit with matching black pants. He wore a mask over his face, a mask which looked like it was straight from a Victorian masquerade party. The mask had a long, skinny nose and no mouth. Its eyes appeared to be sewn shut. In his hand was a large, silver platter with a dome concealing its contents. He walked swiftly and without hesitation. At once, he stood directly over me, his gaze never meeting my own. He lifted the platter's sparkling dome. Upon it were 8 perfect stacks of $100 bills and a razor. As my shaky hands drew near my prospective rent funds, the man raised his hand like a crossguard trying to stop a car. Instead, he lifted the razor. I looked at the razor and then at him, though he seemed to be fixated on something beyond me. "What do I do with it?" I asked, cringing at the weakness of my cracking voice. I turned my gaze back to the chalkboard, which revealed a new message. "Shave one of your eyebrows off," it said. "That's it?" I asked the man, though I was sure he wouldn't answer. If I had to walk around for a month or so, looking like an idiot, at least I'd have an apartment to hide in the meantime. I plucked the razor from his gloved hand and promptly erased my eyebrows. I set the razor back on the platter when I was done and scooped up the stacks of bills. My feet were unsteady as I walked haphazardly to the door, looking back one more time before thanking the silent man and leaving. Rent was paid on time that month. My insides felt slimy and sick for a while after using the services of Riley's Fungeon, though I wish I could say that feeling had stopped me from ever returning. Over the following months, I had returned for various things, ranging from more help with my financial burdens or the occasional steak dinners. All of the requests had remained fairly innocent. Once I had to shave my entire head bald. Another time they made me flip my eyelids open, though sometimes they were a bit more ominous. Once I had to smash one of my fingers with a hammer, which had broken it, though the money I got was able to pay for a doctor's visit and more. They'd also made me pull one of my teeth after I requested a little help in the dating scene, but it was more than worth it after my recent influx of female visitors. Truthfully, life was good, but as it was programmed in my lizard brain, humans simply cannot let a good thing be. I figured if I got one big lump sum that I would never have to return to the Fungeon, but I had to be smart. I had to be. If I asked for $1 million, could you imagine what horrible shit they'd make me do? I couldn't let that happen. I needed help. The trees were barren at this point, and a thin layer of sleep had taken up residence on the sidewalk leading to my grandmother's home. She was more than excited to see her seldom-present grandson knocking at the front door. Without hesitation, she allowed me in. By the time I explained to her what Riley's Fungin was all about, I felt a little guilty. I mean, I couldn't be the one taking that sort of punishment, you know? Besides, she wasn't going to be around for much longer anyways. After pleading with her for what felt like eternity, I'm surprised she didn't die of old age by how long that conversation took. She finally agreed to join me on a visit to the place. None the wiser, of course. Perhaps it's that dementia-riddled part of their brain that steals any sort of reasoning. Truly, had anyone else heard the ridiculous shit I was spewing, they'd have me thrown in the loony bin. But not my Mima, no sir. She was just as eager as I was to sit on that crimson couch as I was. "So how do I do this?" she croaked, looking around suspiciously at the shadows surrounding us. I nudged at her ribs and pointed at the button. "Just press that and say what I told you," I spat, but added gently, "Just think of what we can do with all that money." She smiled at me, a worn, wrinkly smile. She reached a frail hand out to the button and pressed it. "Yes, I would like." She trailed off, a worried look spreading over her ragged face. "I would like $5 million. I cringed at how foolish she sounded, how unaware she was at the power this place held. Suddenly, she slumped over and began to convulse. I jumped up. "What the fuck?" I yelped, peering over at the chalkboard. Scribbled on the board were two words, two simple words. "Kill him." When I returned my gaze to my grandma, she had vanished. The room was entirely still, entirely silent. I stood there for a minute, then two, before something in the shadows had caught my eye. Something horrible, something grisly. Its limbs bent twisted at terrible, awkward angles, cracking and popping as the creature drew closer to me. It moved slowly, watching me from the perfect shroud of darkness. Then, like a bolt of lightning, it climbed to the heavens, skittering with amazing speed along the ceiling. My legs began buckling as I tried helplessly to get away from the thing. I fell to my knees and called out for my grandma, calling for help, for anyone to save me from this monster. Then, from the darkness overhead, emerged a knobby, veined hand with a wedding ring on one of its twisted fingers. "Don't worry, I'm here," my grandma's voice called from the darkness. Then, from the pool of black, her face emerged. Her jaw hung limp, revealing a gaping mouth filled with rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its eyes were pulled back into huge black ovals like a cartoonish depiction of an alien. Beyond those rows of teeth emanated the smell of 1,000 corpses. At this, a surge of adrenaline brought my gelatinous legs back to life as I pushed my way back out into the world, back to my apartment. I'm not sure how long I've been held up here since the day the Funjon turned my grandma into an otherworldly creature. Weeks? Months, maybe? Every time I think of leaving the house, I can hear something skittering just outside my window, just outside my sight. I can hear her sometimes, but she only ever says the same thing. Everything comes with a price, and if you can stomach that, the next story will push you beyond fear. We were trapped in an abandoned suburb, Pineport 2. We had walked in a straight line for nearly 2 hours and came back to 52 Magnolia Way. We trembled as we felt the weight of what was transpiring fall on us like a ton of bricks. We broke down under the burden of soul-crushing dread. That doesn't make any sense," Yasmin whimpered, her hand slowly releasing from mine. Zach let out a strangled cry and crumbled to the ground, his tears dripping onto the asphalt. He hollered until his voice cracked. "No," John shook his head and stepped backwards. "Someone's got to be playing a prank on us. I mean, they gotta be." "What type of elaborate fucking prank is that?" Bryce screamed in his face. "I don't fucking know, all right?" John screamed back, pushing him out of his personal space. "That's not possible," I told John, swiveling around to face him with tears trickling down my face. "This wasn't here a few hours ago. It's not possible to change the entire layout of a town just for a prank." "Okay," John snapped, throwing his hands in the air. "Then I don't know. What do you want me to say? That the ghosts did it?" "Jesus Christ," I moaned in exasperation as I took my glasses off and rubbed my eyes. "That's exactly what the hell is going on. Don't even pretend it's not." Vanessa argued with us, all while still filming. "I've had enough of that fucking camera." Yasmin lunged for her, and Vanessa ducked out the way. "Stop!" I came between them as Yasmin fought to take the camera away, her face flushed red from anger. Vanessa was smiling, but it was a pathetic and weak smile, and her lips were trembling as tears ran down her cheeks. "I'm not doing anything," she said quietly, wiping snot from her nose. "Just let me have this." "Yas, chill out." I grabbed my best friend's shoulders and held her firmly at bay. She breathed deeply in and out through her nose, her eyes shooting daggers at Vanessa, and her teeth worrying her bottom lip. "Fighting isn't helping," I said in a calmer voice. She jerked her arms out of my grasp and turned away, trying to collect herself. "What's going on?" Zach uttered through quiet snobs, his voice nasally with mucus. "Why is this happening to us? If we go back, will the same thing happen?" John wondered. "I'm trying it." Bryce turned and walked in the direction we had come. "Wait." Vanessa rushed over to him and grabbed his arm, but he shrugged her off. "We just came from there." We rushed to keep up with them as the two bickered. "I don't care. We don't have anything to lose from trying," Bryce replied stubbornly. "If the same shit happens, then that means we're trapped." Zach looked about ready to have another breakdown. John wrapped an arm around him reassuringly. Don't think like that. We must have gotten turned around somehow." "Bullshit." Vanessa threw him a dirty look over her shoulder. "You guys are in denial, and it's not helping the situation at all. What we need to be doing is trying to appease the spirits, not spending another 2 hours walking this fucking road." "Appease my ass," Bryce scoffed. "I'm not gonna." He stopped walking, making Vanessa nearly run into him. I cut myself off as I looked ahead and realized what he was staring at. Everyone's gaze fell on a solitary figure, standing just at the edge of the further reaches of our flashlight beams in the center of the road. It was a child, made obvious by her height, and Bryce's flashlight highlighted her from the torso down. She wore a filthy, faded purple dress, and her feet were bare. She could have been at least 8 or 9 years old. "What's a kid doing out here?" John muttered. Bryce lifted the flashlight and illuminated the figure's face, giving us the horrifying truth. The girl had no eyes, only blood-caked empty eye sockets. Her brown, frizzy hair was matted and tangled. Her skin was bloodless, and her pale lips were pressed into an eerie thin line. She stood still like a statue, not even moving a hair's width, the dark pits in her face emotionlessly boring holes into us. We all flinched and drew in a sharp breath, taken aback by the gruesome sight. Oh my God. Yasmin's mouth fell open as she staggered backward. "I saw her obituary. That's the Jenkins girl. She's fucking dead. She's dead." I couldn't help it. I screamed and ran back towards that dreaded eye-ripper house, away from that horrifying specter. I could hear the pounding footfalls of the others right behind me, cursing and panting from fear. I scrambled into John's car, still parked outside, in the passenger side seat. "Go, go, go," I screamed, slapping the dashboard as John threw himself into the driver's seat and took out his car keys. "We have to get out of here. Try it again," Yasmin shouted as she and the others slid into the back seat, their shoulders flush against each other. I'm trying. John tried to ignite the engine over and over again, but it only spat and spluttered like a wounded animal. "This is hopeless." Vanessa shook her head. Camera raised towards the window as she looked for any more unwelcome specters. "They don't want us to leave, so we're not going to be able to. That's why we can't call anyone. That's why we can't walk back. And that's why the car won't start." "Then what do you suppose we do?" I faced her with an annoyed look. "Clearly, we disturbed the spirits," Vanessa began her explanation. "I think it happened when Zach left the game. You're supposed to say a proper goodbye when you're finished communicating with a spirit over the Ouija, or else the window between our world and theirs won't close." "Oh, come on," Zach groaned. "Don't put this shit on me." "I think this place was already fucked to begin with," Yasmin theorized. "We just should have never came here. That was our mistake. And I know I begged you guys to come, so I'm sorry. To think I almost stayed at home." Bryce groaned, head in his hands. "We can't sit here pointing fingers. We have to figure out a solution," I said, looking at the house in front of us warily. "Vanessa, Yasmin, since you guys seem to know so much about ghosts, do you have any idea how we can get out of this?" "Like I said," Vanessa replied, "appease them." "Appease them fucking how?" I pressed. Vanessa seemed surprised at my aggression. We go in there, we get out the board, we apologize, and end the game correctly this time. She shot a glare at Zach, and he threw his middle finger up at her. In there? Bryce looked at her like she was crazy. In where? The house where we caught that thing in the basement on camera. In there? Yes, in there. Vanessa glared at him. Unless you have any better ideas? Let's do it, John said. He was the last person I expected to follow along. I didn't believe in ghosts before, but I guess I can't argue with whatever the fuck we saw back there. Let's do this, and quick. Yasmin agreed. I'm not going back in there. Zach shrunk in on himself. Bro, there's 6 of us against one creepy little girl, John tried to reason with him. And it might not work without every participant, Vanessa added. It took some nagging to get Zach to agree to leave the car, but eventually we found ourselves going back inside. First, John went out the car and checked our surroundings, and when he deduced there were no scary dead girls lurking about, we all got out next, took the Ouija board from the trunk, and hurried through the front door. Bryce locked it. Ghosts aren't deterred by locked doors, babe. Yasmin raised an eyebrow. Whatever. Bryce waved her away. Let's get this apology thing over with. Are we going to have to go back down in the basement? I asked, hoping that wasn't the case. That's where the kids died. Vanessa nodded grimly. We have to. We filed down the basement slowly, flinching at every creak of the wood under our shoes. We scoured the whole place with flashlights, making sure no one was hiding, then sat down around the board like we did earlier. The atmosphere was heavy and foreboding. Once again, Vanessa set up the camera to film, and Yasmin lit 4 candles. We all piled our hands on top of the planchette, candlelight flickering over our sweaty and nervous faces. Is there anyone there? Yasmin stammered, all her nerves from the first time gone without a trace. This time, when the planchette moved under our hands, we didn't deny a ghost was doing it. We simply held our breath and watched as it landed on the word yes. Listen, Yasmin choked out through a sob. We just want to say we're sorry for bothering you all in here. We were just trying to have fun and... She stopped talking as the planchette spelled out a word. Forgiven. It says we're forgiven. I smiled and wiped away a tear. So then we can leave? Zach asked unsurely. The planchette started moving again. Leavyoureyes. It said, leave your eyes, Vanessa whispered. My heart skipped a beat. We can't leave without our eyes, dipshits. Bryce screamed towards the ceiling. That's when all hell broke loose. Suddenly, Yasmin, who was sitting right across from me, screamed and backpedaled away from the Ouija board. She was looking at me. No, she was looking behind me? I turned around, and an eyeless child, the boy I'd seen in the window, was standing over me. Everything happened all at once. Everyone screamed the loudest and hardest I've ever heard them scream. And at the same time, the little boy's eye sockets and mouth yawned open into massive holes, unnaturally elongating his white face. A ragged screech tore from his throat, and the Ouija board suddenly picked itself up, along with the candles, and soared across the room, slamming into the wall. We all fought with each other to get up the stairs first, clambering and shoving and stampeding towards the door and away from that horrible banshee caterwaul the entity below was releasing. Zach tried to claw his way past me, and I shouldered him aside, our actions driven by pure and primal fear. He stumbled and fell down the stairs, and my mind in its state of fight or flight didn't register this immediately. Once we were in the kitchen, we turned towards the basement door as Zach's screams of terror spilled out from the darkness. Zach, John yelled, running for the stairs. Bryce held him back. We need to go. Go where? Yasmin cried, spinning in a circle. We're trapped. Zach's screams were suddenly cut off very abruptly, and we all froze up for a single, petrified moment. Anywhere but here, I blurted before turning and dashing out the kitchen, down the hallway and through the front door. I could hear the others following me. I had no plan, but as soon as I saw the neighboring vacant house to the right, I beelined straight for it. Thank God it was unlocked too, and also deserted while being fully furnished, like the tenants had left in a hurry, and the layout of the floor plan was identical. We threw ourselves through the front door and fled into the living room. John immediately rushed to lock everything and cover the windows with the curtains. Yasmin curled up in a corner behind an armchair recliner, and rocked back and forth, her face soaked with her tears. Bryce looked about ready to cry himself, but he somehow held himself back as he furiously paced the floor and muttered to himself. Vanessa sat herself down on the sofa, camera still held in her hand as if it were glued to it, and pathetically filmed us as she shook like a leaf. "What the fuck was that?" I murmured as I slowly slid my back down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. I had managed to grab my flashlight on the way out the basement, and it seemed John and I were the only ones that remembered to. "A spirit," Vanessa replied, her voice completely hollow. "We should have never come. I'm going to make sure nothing's in here." John grabbed an old, dusty walking cane that was leaning against the wall as a weapon and left the living room. "You can't hurt a spirit that way," Vanessa called after him. He ignored her. She got up and traipsed over to Yasmin, crouching and putting the camera in her face. "So Yazzie, confession cam time. What do you have to say for yourself now that you know you're going to be the reason for our deaths?" Yasmin said nothing, staring into space and swaying back and forth. "Come on," Bryce weakly protested. "Hey," I snapped. "Leave her alone. You wanted to come just as much as her. In fact, you were the first person to agree to going." "Don't even get me started on you." Vanessa spun around and shoved the camera in my face next. "I know you pushed Zach. You two were behind everyone. But I know he didn't just accidentally fall down the stairs. You should fess up to your sins before you die." I felt sick to my stomach. How did she know if she was ahead of us? Did she look back at the wrong second? "Listen, he was shoving me too," I argued, afraid that I was going to be ostracized for this fatal mistake. Vanessa threw her head back and laughed. "Oh my God, dude, I was just shitting you. I didn't know you actually did it." "Wow, you're like a murderer." "Shut up." I pushed her and she fell back on her ass, but she simply stared up at me through the camera lens with a taunting smile. "Guys, this is really not the time for a cat fight." Bryce stepped between us, giving me a warning glare. Suddenly, we were startled by a pounding on the door. We all leapt to our feet, our caveman instincts ready to take over at the sign of danger again, but a familiar voice bled through the door. "Hey, let me in," Zach pleaded, banging the door some more. "Hurry up, before they notice." I ran to unlock the front door and threw it open to the sight of Zach, sweaty and breathing hard, his glasses missing. He rushed past me, and I quickly closed and locked the door, but not before catching a glimpse of the outside. It was void of life on the street, thankfully, as I had half expected to see either of the creepy ghost children again. Zach stood in the center of the room, bent over with his hands on his knees and panting heavily. John came from upstairs just then. He seemed shocked like the rest of us. "You're alive, barely," Zach said. "You were screaming so much," Yasmin said. "We thought for sure that thing back there had gotten you." Bryce nodded. We all looked at Zach as if we were beholding a miracle. "It chased me, but I got away." Zach walked over to the corner and turned his head towards the ceiling. "Thank Christ I got away. That was the most terrifying moment of my entire life. We need to figure out where to go from here," I said, pushing my glasses up my nose. "Well, apologizing clearly didn't fucking work," Yasmin grumbled. "Let's think about what we know about them," I mused. "They were brutally murdered by a psycho, and they want their eyes back." "Oh, yes, let's magically conjure up a set of working eyes for each of them," Vanessa retorted. "You know, another crazy thing about this case is that their eyes were never found," Yasmin said slowly. "Some people say that maybe he ate them, or just disposed of them, but no one knows. Not even his own eyes were found." "Yeah, because more creepy stories is exactly what we need right now," Bryce quipped. "What if—" Yasmin seemed to brainstorm, slowly pacing the room. "What if the eyes are still here?" "Huh?" John squinted at her. "Sometimes ghosts haunt people to get them to find their remains," Yasmin explained. "What if their eyes were actually in that house all this time, but the police just never found them? I mean, he hid their bodies in the walls. He could have hid their eyes too." We all stared at her. I shook my head. "Yasmin, that's an insane theory." "They said they're looking for their eyes," Yasmin replied indignantly. "That doesn't mean they're still around, and if they are, they're probably rotted into dust by now." Bryce scoffed. "I think it's worth a shot," John said. He noticed the look we gave him. "Listen, I don't know about you guys, but I don't enjoy being trapped with a bunch of little demons, so I'm willing to try just about everything to get out of here, even if it means looking for rotted, dusty old eyes. Or we could sacrifice someone. We all stared at Zach. Up until then, he has been standing awkwardly against the corner of the wall listening to us since he last spoke. He stared back stoically, and I realized he was dead serious. Come again? Vanessa raised an eyebrow. They want our eyes, so we should pick someone to sacrifice and give them that person's eyes, Zach said as he stepped forward slowly. Then they'll be satisfied and leave us alone. I think that person should be Yasmin, since she led you all here. He's definitely going nuts. Bryce cautiously kept an eye on Zach, protectively putting an arm over Vanessa and making her back away from him. Meanwhile, Yasmin confronted the skinny boy. Oh yeah? You think that's funny? Yasmin pushed him back against the wall. Who do you think you are? You're only hanging with us anyways because John felt bad for you. Get back in your place before I put you there, asshole. You have pretty eyes. Zach seemed unfazed and stared unblinkingly at Yasmin. In fact, I didn't remember seeing him blink much at all. Was he really losing his sanity? Babe, do you hear this jerk? Yasmin looked to Bryce for help and frowned as she saw he was just letting Vanessa cower behind him and not making a move to stand up for her. The hell? You just gonna let him talk to me like that? Listen, I don't think you guys should start a fight, Bryce meekly said. Zach, what's gotten into you? John asked earnestly, appearing genuinely concerned. Now's not the time for your weird sense of humor, man. Suddenly there was a rustling of a bush coming from outside, where dead shrubbery lined the exterior walls. I held a finger to my lips to signal them all to be quiet, creeping over to the window. I discreetly peeked through the smallest crack in the curtains and saw a little girl, this time blonde with a blood-stained pink shirt and white shorts, crouching in the bushes with her face in her hands as if she were crying, but no sound came out. She was eerily still with flesh white as snow. I slowly backed away and gestured for everyone to go upstairs. They followed me up, and I closed us inside a bedroom and drew the curtains over the single window in there. The room was furnished with a big bed, a vanity dresser, and a nightstand, with a closet door in the corner. It was obvious by the decoration that everything was from a different era. We're just more isolated in here, Vanessa complained. I feel better closed up in here than down there, I replied, glancing quickly at my exhausted face in the vanity mirror. What was it? Yasmin asked nervously. The Jenkins girl again? No, it was a different little girl. I swallowed a lump in my throat. She was blonde and had on a pink shirt and shorts. She was just sitting there, curled up with her face in her hands, like she was either crying or playing hide and seek. I could see everyone's faces fall in fear, except for Zach's. He seemed absolutely emotionless all of a sudden. But he had been the most dramatic out of all of us so far, so maybe he had tired himself out. That sounds like Sarah, Vanessa whispered, turning the camera to me. That was the outfit she went missing in. Leave it to a die-hard true crime fan like Vanessa to remember even the smallest details about a homicide case she was obsessed with. Soullessness hurts. Zach quietly spoke, his voice void of emotion or any inflection. We all turned to him, and there was a beat of silence. He was facing towards the wall, away from us, just blankly staring at the flowery wallpaper that was peeling and faded with age. I frowned and took a step back. Something didn't feel right about him. His presence felt off compared to before. He didn't feel like the same person anymore. What's his deal? Bryce asked John, gesturing to him. He's just traumatized, John defended him, walking towards him. You all right, Zach? I know what happened in the basement was. He grabbed Zach's arm and suddenly let go with a jolt of surprise going through his body, as if he had touched a hot stovetop. What? Vanessa asked. He's ice cold, man. John shook his head, bewildered as he looked at his own fingertips. Like he's been in a freezer. I think you should lie down. Zach let John ease him onto the queen-sized canopy bed, like those princess beds with the curtains I dreamed of having when I was 10. Zach laid down on his back with his blank gaze fixed upward, not saying a word more and not making eye contact with any of us. Look, I think we need to go through with my plan. Yasmin brought all our attention back to her. Zach's clearly in shock. We have to get him out of here. For once, I agree. Vanessa sighed. We have to do something. This is crazy. Bryce shook his head. I'm not going back to that house. Then stay, John replied harshly. Look after Zach. Does everyone still have their walkies? I patted the walkie still attached to my belt loop, hovering over my jeans. Yasmin nodded after checking to see that her walkie was still clipped to the breast pocket of her pink sweat jacket. Bryce took his walkie out his jeans pocket, and Vanessa took hers out the pouch of Bryce's hoodie, which she was still wearing. John had his in his belt loop as well. Great, since phones don't work, maybe we can communicate that way? John lifted the walkie to his mouth. Testing, testing. Shh. I shushed him as his voice filtered through our walkies. So are we doing this or what? Let's go around back so that thing doesn't see us, Yasmin suggested. We all agreed, and she turned to Bryce and hugged him tightly in case it would be the last embrace they ever had. He awkwardly patted her back. She went to give him a kiss, but he turned his face away. What's wrong? Look around us. Everything is wrong. Bryce didn't look at her. Whatever. Yasmin stormed towards the door, trying to hide the hurt of rejection on her face. Look after Zach and tell us if you need help. John, Grace, Vanessa, come on. Little did we know how much worse things would get from that point on. That was only a whisper of the terror to come. Let me take you deeper. The silent fields of Middleton. The drive into town was uneventful, but the isolation of the countryside pressed on me more with every passing mile. I had taken the assignment from the magazine on a whim, looking for something different from the usual fast-paced urban reporting. A remote farming town in the middle of nowhere seemed like a good way to unwind, or so I thought. I didn't anticipate that the silence would have such a weight to it. I'd been a journalist for over a decade, mostly covering political scandals, city crime, and occasionally dipping my toes into feature stories that offered a respite from the chaos. This time, it was something altogether different. I was sent to investigate the strange customs and superstitions of this remote town that most people had never even heard of. The road leading into the town was long and narrow, cutting through endless fields of corn. The stalks stretched toward the sky, their tops swaying gently in the breeze. I rolled down the car window to let in some fresh air, but the scent was strange. Not the sweet, earthy smell of crops, but something metallic and faintly sour. I tried to ignore it as the first few houses of the town came into view. It was nearing dusk when I pulled into what passed for the town square. A handful of buildings, a grocery store, a diner, and a post office lined the street, each one as weathered and tired as the others. The streets were empty, the place almost ghostly in its quiet. I parked the car outside a small, worn-down inn. According to the research I'd done before arriving, this was the only place in town that rented rooms to outsiders. The innkeeper, a woman in her 60s with deep-set wrinkles and a permanent frown, greeted me at the front desk with a glance that felt more like a warning. "You're the journalist?" she asked, her voice gravelly and low. "That's right," I said, giving her a nod as I handed over my ID. "I'm here for a week, working on a piece about local folklore, strange customs, superstitions, that kind of thing." The innkeeper's eyes narrowed. "Folklore, huh? You be careful about poking around too much. Some things are better left alone." Her words struck me as odd, but I didn't dwell on them. I chalked it up to small-town superstition. I'd dealt with people who believed in far stranger things before. After checking in, I grabbed my bag and headed up to my room, promising myself I'd get an early start on interviews the next day. The room was small and musty, but it had everything I needed. A single window looked out over the cornfields that bordered the town. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the fields, I stood by the window and watched as the wind made the cornstalks sway like waves on a dark sea. Something about the view made me feel uneasy. The isolation, perhaps, or the overwhelming quiet. I closed the curtains and decided to get some sleep. That night, I dreamt of voices. They were faint, almost whispers, carried on a breeze that seemed to drift through my open window. In the dream, I was walking through the cornfields, the stalks towering over me on either side. The voices grew louder as I moved deeper into the fields, beckoning me, calling my name. I woke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was pitch dark, the silence oppressive. I glanced toward the window, but it was still closed. I could have sworn I heard someone whisper my name just before I woke, but there was no one here. I chalked it up to a vivid dream and tried to settle back into sleep. The next morning, I began my work. I spent most of the day speaking with the locals, farmers, store owners, and the few families who had lived in the town for generations. Everyone was polite enough, but there was a common thread in their responses, a reluctance to talk about the town's history or the strange customs I was here to investigate. I brought up the cornfields a few times, hoping to steer the conversation toward the topic of the strange rumors I had heard before arriving. Rumors about the listeners and the town's peculiar rule about silence after nightfall. But most people brushed it off or outright refused to engage. An older man at the diner, who introduced himself as Bill, was the only one willing to talk, though he didn't say much. "You're not from here," Bill said, stirring his coffee absently. "You'll find things a little different in this town. Folks don't talk much about the fields. It's safer that way." "Safer how?" I pressed, hoping for more details. Bill's gaze shifted toward the window, where the cornfields stretched out toward the horizon. "There are things you hear in the fields," he said quietly. "Things you shouldn't listen to." "Like what?" I asked, leaning forward. Bill didn't answer right away. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes still fixed on the distant corn. "Just don't speak near the fields at night," he finally said. "And if you hear voices on the wind, pretend you didn't." That was as much as I could get from him. The rest of the townspeople were even more tight-lipped. I spent the rest of the day wandering the outskirts of the town, taking notes and snapping photos for the article, but something about the place left me feeling off. It was too quiet, too still. The kind of place where you expect to hear birds or insects, but there was nothing, just the constant rustling of the cornfields. As evening approached, I returned to the inn. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the town, and a cold wind had picked up. I stood by the window in my room, looking out at the darkening fields. I couldn't help but think about what Bill had said. Don't speak near the fields at night. That night, after a quiet dinner in the town's small diner, I found myself back in the inn, sitting at the window, watching the dark fall over the fields again. There was something about the wind here, something that made me feel like I wasn't alone, even though I couldn't see anyone out there. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting just beyond the fields, watching, listening. I glanced at my notes from the day. Bill's warning about not speaking near the fields had lodged itself in my mind. As far as superstitions go, it wasn't the strangest I'd encountered, but the way the townspeople avoided the subject made it feel more serious. And then there was that strange quiet, the way the wind carried no sound but its own. It was as if the entire town held its breath once the sun went down. I flipped through my notebook, considering the interviews. Most of what I'd gotten was vague, non-committal responses from the locals. People who, by all appearances, just wanted me to leave them and their strange customs alone. But I wasn't about to leave without getting to the bottom of whatever was going on here. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window, pulling my attention back outside. The cornfields swayed in the distance, their tops bending in unison as the wind passed through. The longer I stared, the more I felt like I could see shapes moving between the rows. Just shadows, I told myself. But there was something about the way the darkness clung to those fields that made me uneasy. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearing midnight. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my jacket and my notebook, determined to investigate. If there was something about the night that brought out the superstition in these people, I wanted to see it for myself. And if I was honest with myself, part of me didn't fully believe any of it. After all, it was just a field. I left the inn quietly, not wanting to alert the innkeeper. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the night feel colder than it should have been for early autumn. I zipped up my jacket and headed toward the fields. The streets were deserted, and the silence of the town felt more oppressive than usual. The cornfields loomed ahead, their stalks swaying gently in the wind, making the only sound in an otherwise dead night. As I neared the edge of the fields, I slowed my pace, feeling a knot of tension form in my chest. There was nothing to fear out here. The listeners, if they even existed, were just a story passed down by the townspeople, a way to explain away the strangeness of the place. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I approached the field. The rule was simple: don't speak near the fields at night. But that rule was for the locals. I wasn't one of them. I stopped at the edge of the field, the wind whispering through the corn. It was almost inviting, as if the field itself was calling me to step closer, to listen. For a long moment, I stood there in the silence, listening to the wind. Then, without thinking, I spoke. "Is anyone out there?" The words barely left my lips before the wind seemed to shift. The rustling of the corn stalk stopped abruptly, leaving an unsettling stillness in its wake. My heart quickened as I scanned the rows of corn, half expecting someone or something to emerge from the darkness. There was no response, no movement, just silence. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, feeling a bit ridiculous for letting the stories get to me. I turned to leave, but as soon as I took a step, I heard it. A voice, soft, distant, but unmistakable, helped me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice had come from the field, from somewhere deep within the rows of corn. It was faint, almost lost on the wind, but it was there. I turned back toward the field, squinting into the darkness, trying to see if someone was out there. The voice came again, this time clearer. "Please, help me." It was a woman's voice, fragile, desperate. Against every instinct telling me to walk away, I took a step closer to the field. Then another. The corn stalks swayed gently as I approached, as if they were waiting for me to come closer. "Where are you?" I called, my voice trembling slightly. The words felt heavy in the stillness, like they didn't belong out here. There was a pause, then the voice answered, "In the field, I'm lost." I hesitated at the edge of the field, my hands trembling. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to go back to the inn and forget this ever happened. But the voice, it sounded so real, so human. I stepped into the field. The corn stalks closed in around me, their dry leaves brushing against my arms and face as I moved deeper into the rows. The farther I went, the harder it was to see anything. The wind had died down completely, leaving an eerie, unnatural silence in its place. "Where are you?" I called again, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm here." The voice came again, closer this time. Just a little further. I pushed forward, my heart pounding in my ears. The corn stalks seemed to stretch on forever, endless rows of tall, looming figures that swayed gently in the darkness. I had no idea how far I'd gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was moving just beyond my field of vision, hiding among the corn. Then, suddenly, the voice was right beside me. "Over here." I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. The voice had been so close, but there was no one there, just the endless rows of corn, their shadows stretching long and dark in the faint moonlight. Panic rose in my chest, and I stumbled backward, my hands brushing against the rough stalks. I turned to leave, but before I could take another step, I heard it again. This time, it was my voice. "Where are you?" The moment I heard my own voice echoing back at me from somewhere deep in the field, my blood ran cold. The exact cadence of my words, the tremor of unease I hadn't realized was there, all of it mirrored back at me with eerie precision. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, listening to the rustling corn, waiting for something, anything, to emerge. But all I heard was silence. And yet, that voice, my voice, had come from somewhere within the stalks. I started backing away, my eyes scanning the rows for movement, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. As much as I wanted to explain it away, to chalk it up to an overactive imagination or some trick of the wind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been lured into that field, that whatever was out there wanted me to follow it, to come closer. No, I had to get out of here. I turned and hurried back toward the edge of the field, pushing through the stalks, my heart pounding in my ears. The rows seemed longer now, as if the field had grown while I was inside. The way out should have been just ahead, but the more I pushed forward, the more disoriented I became. The corn closed in around me, the darkness deepening, the whispers fading in and out of earshot, too faint to catch, but always just beyond reach. "Help me!" A voice, barely audible, whispered from behind. I stopped in my tracks, every muscle tensed. My breath hitched. It was my voice again. "Please, help me." I forced myself not to turn around, not to acknowledge it. I picked up my pace, nearly tripping over the thick roots and dry soil beneath me. It felt like the field was swallowing me whole. The more I tried to escape, the more the corn seemed to tighten its grip around me. The wind had picked up again, and with it came more voices, faint, indistinguishable, but all of them carried a tone of familiarity, like they had once belonged to someone I knew. "Don't leave us." I pushed harder, breaking into a run now, the stalks whipping against my face and arms. My mind raced, my pulse drumming in my throat. The voices were growing louder, more insistent, calling from all directions. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. My foot caught on something, a thick root or maybe an old furrow in the field. I went down hard, the wind knocked out of me as I hit the earth. The whispers closed in around me, the wind swirling faster through the corn. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, feeling the pull of the darkness behind me, urging me to turn around. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my ankle, and stumbled forward. And then, as suddenly as it had all begun, I broke free. I stumbled out of the field and onto the road, the tall stalks of corn swaying behind me like a living wall. My chest heaved with exhaustion and fear. I turned back, staring at the field in disbelief. The whispers were gone, the air unnervingly still. It was as if the field had returned to normal, as if nothing had happened at all. But something had happened. I wasn't imagining this. My hand instinctively went to my throat, feeling for something I couldn't name, something out of place. For a moment, I thought I could feel a faint scratch, like a jagged scar barely healed. But when I looked down, there was nothing. No mark, just my own skin, clammy with sweat. I backed away from the field, my mind reeling. What was happening here? I made it back to the inn in a daze, my legs trembling with every step. The streets were still empty, the town silent as ever. Not a soul stirred, not even at the diner across the street. I slipped inside the inn, my footsteps sounding too loud in the quiet of the lobby. The innkeeper was nowhere to be seen, and for that, I was grateful. I didn't want to explain where I had been or why I looked like I had seen a ghost. In my room, I locked the door behind me, my hands shaking as I twisted the deadbolt into place. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. But the more I thought about it, the more fragmented it became. Had I really heard those voices? Had I really been lured into that field? I needed to leave. I wasn't safe here. Whatever was in those fields, it wasn't human. And the more time I spent in this town, the more I felt like it was pulling me closer to something I couldn't understand, something that wanted to trap me. I collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion overtaking me, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whispers again, calling my name, echoing in my own voice. The next day, I woke to a weak, gray light filtering through the thin curtains of my room. The town felt different now, less oppressive, but also more hollow, like I was walking through a shell of a place that had long since given up its secrets. I couldn't shake the events of the night before, and despite every instinct telling me to pack up and leave, I needed answers. I had to know what was happening in this town, why the fields seemed to be alive with something otherworldly, and why no one would talk about it. At breakfast, I spotted Bill, the man who had first told me about the rule of silence near the fields. He was sitting alone at a corner table, staring into his coffee like the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. I approached cautiously, not wanting to startle him. "Bill?" I said softly. He looked up, his eyes weary but alert. "You're still here," he said, as if he had expected me to be gone by now. "You didn't listen, did you?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "I went to the fields last night. I heard something." His face paled, and he leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You heard them, didn't you? The listeners." "What are they?" I asked, my voice just as quiet. Bill glanced around the diner, as if making sure no one else was listening. "They've been here for as long as anyone can remember," he said. "We don't know where they came from or what they want, but we know they're always listening. They take your voice, your words, and use them against you. And once they have a hold on you, there's no escaping." I felt a chill run down my spine. But why me? Why now? Bill shook his head. "They target anyone who doesn't follow the rules." "You spoke near the fields at night, didn't you?" I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "That's how they find you," he repeated, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. Once you speak, they latch on. They mimic you, lure you in, and before you know it, you're lost. Just like the others. The weight of his words settled on me like a heavy fog, thick and inescapable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something just beyond the walls of the diner. I wanted to ask more, but the old man's eyes told me enough. This was a truth he had carried for years, one that had hollowed him out from the inside. "Did anyone ever make it back?" I asked, barely able to bring myself to form the words. He shifted in his seat, rubbing his fingers together like he was holding something invisible, something fragile. "A few, but they weren't the same when they came back." "Not really. The listeners? They take something from you, even if you manage to get away." He pointed to his own throat, and for the first time, I noticed the thin, jagged scar running along his skin, a mark that had faded with time, but not with memory. They leave their mark on you. Your voice isn't your own anymore, and sometimes, even your thoughts, they're not yours either. A chill ran through me, the kind that seeps into your bones. "What do you mean?" "They change you. Some people come back, and they don't speak at all, as if they're afraid their own words will betray them. Others speak, but their voices sound hollow, like echoes of what they once were. You can hear it in their tone, that emptiness. And some..." He trailed off, his eyes darkening as if remembering something too painful to say aloud. "Some listen to the wind as if they're waiting for something, waiting to be called back." I swallowed hard, trying to process what he was telling me. The wind outside seemed to pick up, rattling the windows of the diner. "But why them? Why does this happen?" He gave a bitter laugh. "That's the question, isn't it? Why anyone? Maybe it's punishment, maybe it's just bad luck. The listeners have been around longer than the town itself, some say. They come with the fields, and when the fields grow, so does their reach." "The fields," I muttered, thinking about the endless rows of corn stretching beyond the town. "Are they getting closer?" The old man's face twisted in a grimace. "You've noticed, haven't you? Every year, they creep a little closer. The fields used to be further out, but now they're right up against the edge of the town. The listeners are expanding their territory, little by little." "And no one says anything about it?" I asked, incredulous. "They're too scared," he said simply. "No one wants to admit it, but everyone knows. That's why they follow the rules, why they stay silent at night, why they don't stray too close to the fields. It's like they think if they pretend it's not happening, it won't reach them. But it will. Eventually, it always does." I felt the air grow heavier, as if the diner itself was holding its breath. The thought of the fields growing, slowly creeping toward the town like a living thing, filled me with a deep, gnawing dread. "Is there any way to stop it?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. The old man looked at me with sad, tired eyes. "I don't think so. Once the listeners have marked you, they don't let go. And the town, it's been theirs for a long time now. We're just living in their shadow." I sat back in my chair, the reality of the situation sinking in. The fields were growing, the listeners were getting closer, and it felt like there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The silence between us stretched out, punctuated only by the occasional gust of wind outside. The old man stared out the window, lost in his own thoughts, while I tried to make sense of everything he had told me. "How do you live with it?" I finally asked. "How do you stay here, knowing what's out there?" He shrugged. "You get used to it, I suppose. You learn the rules, and you keep your head down. It's not much of a life, but it's better than being out there with them." He paused, his gaze far away. "Besides, leaving isn't as easy as you think. Once you're marked, it follows you. The voices, the wind, it doesn't stop just because you run." I didn't have an answer to that. What could I say? The town was a prison, but the outside world was no escape. I finished my coffee, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue. "Thanks for the warning," I said, though I wasn't sure it would make any difference. "I'll be careful." He nodded, his expression solemn. "I hope so. But be careful about one thing, kid. Once you've heard them, they don't forget you." The old man's words echoed in my mind as I left the diner. Outside, the wind had died down, but the air was still thick with an oppressive silence. The pale light of the morning sun weak against the gray sky. But the town, the fields, it all felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. The faint rustling of the corn felt intentional, deliberate, like the fields were breathing, waiting. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the unease that clung to me like a second skin. It was just corn, I told myself, but my feet still moved a little quicker as I walked back to my car. I started the engine, the low hum giving me a momentary sense of normalcy. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It was only 8:30 in the morning. The sun had barely risen, but already it felt like it had been swallowed by the grayness around me. There was no warmth in the light, no comfort in the day. As I drove back through town, I passed a few people on the street, locals going about their daily business. But no one spoke, not even a wave or a nod. Their eyes flickered to me, then quickly away, as if acknowledging my presence would somehow invite something unwanted. I was beginning to understand the unspoken rules of this place. You didn't speak after dark, and in the daylight, you simply acted like the night never happened. I should have left. Every instinct told me to pack up and drive far from here, but I couldn't. Not yet. There was still something pulling at me, something unfinished. I made it back to my room at the small inn I'd been staying at. The room felt stuffy, the air heavy with a faint mildew scent that clung to everything. I opened the window to let in some fresh air, but the view outside didn't bring any relief. The cornfields stretched out in the distance, dark and looming, and they were closer than I remembered. I froze. Was that my imagination? The fields seemed to have crept closer to the town, like they'd swallowed up the distance overnight. I blinked, trying to clear my mind. Maybe it was just the angle, or maybe I was overthinking everything. I needed to stay calm, but calm wasn't an option. As the hours passed, I couldn't stop glancing out the window. The fields remained there, unmoving but somehow alive, their dark tendrils curling at the edges of my vision. I tried to distract myself, reading, jotting down notes from the old man's story, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to the fields. But no matter what I did, the pull was there, like an itch at the back of my skull. The day dragged on, each minute a weight pressing down on me. I watched the light shift from pale morning gray to the dull orange of late afternoon, and my nerves frayed with every passing hour. The townsfolk had retreated into their homes by now, their doors firmly shut, their curtains drawn. No one wanted to be outside when the night came. And yet, I stayed. By the time the sky began to darken, the air felt thick with anticipation. I could hear it now, the faint, rhythmic rustling of the cornfields in the distance, like the sound of 1,000 whispers carried on the wind. It was almost soothing if it wasn't for the undercurrent of malice, like those whispers were directed at me. I checked the clock, 6:40 p.m. Sunset was coming. I paced around the room, trying to make a decision. Stay? Leave? Something inside me screamed to leave before nightfall, but curiosity kept me anchored. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast and terrible, and part of me needed to know what was out there. As the last rays of sunlight faded, the shadows lengthened, creeping across the town like a living thing, and then in the silence I heard it, voices. Soft at first, carried on the faint breeze that swept through the open window. At first, they were unintelligible murmurs, just a whisper in the background. But as the night deepened, they became clearer, louder, familiar. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was hearing. The voices weren't just random whispers, they were mine. My voice calling out into the night, repeating things I'd never said. I rushed to the window, staring out at the dark fields. And then I saw them. Figures moving through the corn. Tall, thin shapes, barely visible in the darkness, their forms swaying in time with the wind. They moved like shadows, slipping between the stalks, their faces obscured by the night. But the voices were everywhere, and they weren't just mine anymore. I slammed the window shut, backing away from the sight. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat slicked my skin. I had to get out of here. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The inn was silent, abandoned, as if everyone else had already fled. When I reached my car, I could still hear the whispers on the wind. They surrounded me, filled the air, pressing in from all sides. I jumped into the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine sputtering to life. I floored the gas, speeding out of the parking lot, desperate to escape. But as I drove through the empty streets, the cornfields seemed to follow me. Every road, every turn led me back to the same dark horizon, the same swaying stalks. It was like the fields were closing in, swallowing the town inch by inch. The voices never stopped, never faded. And then up ahead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The road ended, swallowed by the corn. The fields had overtaken the outskirts, pushing into the town itself. There was no escape. The listeners were coming. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just inches from the edge of the field. The stalks swayed in the darkness, and for a moment, I thought I saw figures standing just beyond the edge, watching me. I had to get out of here, but there was nowhere left to run. I sat in the car, my hands gripping the wheel, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The whispers were louder now, filling the air, echoing inside my head. My voice calling out from the fields, telling me to come closer, telling me to listen. And then, as the last light of day vanished, I heard it. The sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the cornfields. The figures were moving closer, stepping out from the shadows, their shapes barely visible in the darkness. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew they were looking at me. I couldn't stay. I couldn't leave. The listeners had found me. I turned the key in the ignition, praying the car would start. The engine roared to life, and I floored the gas, driving straight toward the cornfields, the road swallowed by the darkness ahead. The figures vanished into the night, and the whispers grew louder, filling the air with their eerie, hollow sound. But I kept driving, faster and faster, until the world around me blurred into a haze of shadows and sound. The voices were everywhere now, inside my head, in the wind, in the fields. They called my name, over and over, pulling me closer. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The road opened up before me, the fields falling away. The town was gone. The whispers faded into nothing, leaving only the sound of my own breathing in the silence. I had escaped.